In this video, we're looking at 10 speed buffs from activatable items. And to clarify a bit more, by activatable, I mean the item in question must be clicked on to work. This also means there will be no player abilities, passives, or crafted consumables on this list. And at number 10, we have Egg Basket from the Noble Garden. This cute little basket can be placed in the offhand weapon slot, and when clicked, increases the player's movement speed by 60% for 10 seconds. There are actually two of these baskets, since there's an exact copy called the Borrowed Egg Basket, which is given during a quick Noble Garden quest called a Tisket, a Tasket, a Noble Garden Basket. Unfortunately, these two items share the same cooldown of 10 seconds. However, since the cooldown has the same duration as the speed buff, you can continuously move at 60% speed as long as you instantly recast it. The best way to accomplish this is to put the egg basket in your action bar for easy access. We'll briefly discuss the history of this item since it has undergone some major changes. Noble Garden was added as a holiday in Classic, but the Egg Basket wasn't added until Wrath of the Lich King. In Shadowlands, the Egg Basket was turned into a cosmetic item which could be learned, and an additional reward from the aforementioned seasonal quest was added, which is a toy called Egger Basket. Because of this, the original Egg Basket offhand item with the clickable speed buff is no longer available in retail, but it does still exist in Classic. However, players do receive an item called the Borrowed Egg Basket in their inventory when they acquire the quests, a Tisket, a Tasket, a Noble Garden Basket. This quest item is the exact same as the original Egg Basket, so a form of the original Egg Basket does exist in the current game. The Egger Basket toy and Borrowed Egg Basket quest items keep all of the same restrictions as the offhand item did, which we'll go over now. The Egg Basket items and the Egger Basket toy have two main drawbacks. First, it can only work during Noble Garden, which only lasts a week around Easter. Second, it only works in certain areas around capital cities where there are brightly colored eggs hidden. The basket can only be used in small designated towns near major cities across Azeroth. For the Alliance, these areas are the Azura Watch, Dolinar, Goldshire, and Karanos. For the Horde, these are Bloodhoof Village, Brill, Falconwing Square, and Razor Hill. The Egg Basket is only at number 10 on this list for two reasons. First, its original version is no longer obtainable in retail, and second, because it requires the player to be at a specific location and the fact that it has a 10-second cooldown. While the fact that it's a very small area of use is a little bit of a damper, it does make sense so the players don't abuse the Egg Basket out in the open world in dungeons and raids and PvP. At least you still have a chance to turn into an adorable Noble Garden bunny while gathering brightly colored eggs. The only downside to being a bunny, other than occasionally dropping an egg from your rear end, is that taking any action while in bunny form, such as using the Egg Basket on your action bar, removes the shapeshifting bunny form, which is a quick way to put less of a spring in your step. And at number 9, we have the Golden Hair figurine. This trinket has both a passive and active ability. When equipped, it increases your run speed by roughly 8%, but when this trinket is clicked on, it increases speed by 30% for 6 seconds. In addition, it also simultaneously prevents new snares from landing on the user for 6 seconds. This made the trinket quite useful, especially while running away from pulling a large pack of mobs and trying to escape in PvP. The Golden Hair figurine was added in the Burning Crusade, can only be crafted by jewel crafters, and its recipe drops from mobs in the open world. To craft it, a jewel crafter requires 2 gold bars, 2 citrin, as well as a skill of 200 in TBC jewel crafting. There are 2 interesting tidbits about this trinket. Although added to the game in 2.0, the Golden Hair figurine originally required the jewel crafter to use 2 cut citrins instead of just regular citrin. The only problem was that cut citrins were never added to the game. And so when TBC first came out, it was unknown the trinket was just a troll by TBC developers or simply a bug. It finally became craftable in 2.1 when the cut citrin requirement was removed and replaced with just regular citrins. The second interesting fact is that when you use this trinket, a cute little bunny rabbit appears next to you and follows you around for a bit. Although very nice, this little bunny isn't enough to overcome the fact this trinket is only a 30% speed boost that only lasts for 6 seconds and has a cooldown of 20 minutes, which is quite long. Wrath also saw an almost identical version of this trinket called the Ruby Hair figurine, but this time crafted by jewel crafters from Northrend Materials. The item has better stats than the TBC version at the time, but its speed ability when activated was exactly the same. And at number 8, we have our first item from Classic, the Nifty Stopwatch. Although it was removed in Cataclysm, it's still one of the most interesting trinkets in all of WoW. The Nifty Stopwatch, when used, increases run speed by 40% for 10 seconds, which is impressive even by modern WoW standards. It is a trinket which is awarded after a short little quest chain in the Badlands, and it is a quite literal little quest chain since the player helps out a gnome by trying to invent some things. Although there were some Badland quests in Classic, this one certainly stands out not in just rewards, but its questline which had the player running around collecting various parts for an invention the gnome is trying to make. Finally, on the last quest, the gnome accidentally summons an elemental guardian and the player must defeat it. The gnome, who is named Lotwell Variatus, then gives the player the trinket in gratitude. The Nifty Stopwatch was considered an optional best-in-slot utility PvP trinket for several classes in Classic, specifically balanced druids, paladins, and hunters. Unfortunately, the trinket has a 30-minute cooldown, meaning when not in use, it's probably better to equip a different trinket. Although it was removed from the game with a world revamp in Cataclysm, Blizzard should think about adding more unique trinkets to the game such as this, instead of removing them and replacing them with simple stat sticks. The Nifty Stopwatch is not only useful, but it's also fun, something which most WoW trinkets routinely lack. And at number 7, we have the item named the Swift Boots. This craftable item comes from the leatherworking profession and has been in the game since WoW launched in 2004. The Swift Boots, when used, increase the run speed of the player by 40% for 15 seconds. The pattern for Swift Boots drop from elite mobs in Classic and redone Cataclysm zones. To craft these boots, a player will need to have learned the pattern, have a Classic leatherworking skill of 200, and obtain the following ingredients: 10 heavy leather, 2 swiftness potions, 2 thick spider silk, and 1 silken thread. In total, it requires 3 professions to create: leatherworking, alchemy, and herbalism. Because of just how good the activated speed boost they give is, the Swift Boots are not usable in arenas. They were also changed in patch 3.1 to no longer work when a player was carrying the flag in Warsong Gulch battlegrounds. In fact, in a perfect application of the ability, the boots make getting to any place 6 seconds faster. The Swift Boots also do have their downsides though. Their cooldown is 20 minutes, which is an acceptable cooldown given what they can do. However, the boots are leather armor since they come from leatherworking, which means only classes which can wear leather items can use them. In Classic WoW, this was only Druids and Rogues, since monks were added in Mista Pandaria, and Demon Hunters in Legion. Although, since any class which can wear mail and plate can also wear leather, this basically just meant only cloth wearers were not allowed to use the boots. And at number 6, we have the Skull of Impending Doom, an offhand item obtained from a Classic quest. Interestingly, like the nifty stopwatch, this quest is also located in the Badlands. While slightly different in Classic, in TBC the item increased your run speed by 60% for 10 seconds, but it also dealt 100 to 500 damage and drained you of 100 to 500 mana every 2 seconds. This means if your HP is at full over 5000 and you weren't taking any other damage, the skull's damage wouldn't kill you. Luckily, since the buff is clickable, the players can remove the buff whenever they wish, which stops both the buffs and the debuffs. The buff the item gives you is called Flee, and the player will make clucking sounds when the buff starts and stops. This clucking sound is the same one heard when doing the /chicken emote. The skull only has a 5-minute cooldown, which is quite short. It made it widely popular for many different applications and builds in both Classic and the Burning Crusade. The item is a quest reward from Forbidden Knowledge. This questline focuses around an archaeological excavation where some old god relics are found. The item has some quite insidious implications, hence the impending doom part of the name. The quest may have been loosely refitted to meld with the dwarf excavation site in the Southern Barrens and Cataclysm, but that's just speculation. On a related note, since all the quests in Badlands were removed with a world revamp in Cataclysm, the Skull of Impending Doom was also removed and can no longer be obtained in WoW post-Cataclysm. And at number 5, we have the 2 Rocket Boots. These are classic engineering crafted items that come from 2 forms, the Gnomish Rocket Boots and the Goblin Rocket Boots. Both boots when used provide a 50% to 70% increase in movement speed for up to 20 seconds. Of course, like most Gnomish and Goblin inventions, the boots come with some dangerous and explosive possible side effects. First, let's take a look at the Gnomish Rocket Boots. These boots are usually preferred since the Goblin ones have a tendency to explode. However, the Gnomish Rocket Boots do come with a warning: their power supply and gyros do not always function as intended. The speed buff can last for up to 20 seconds, but they also have a chance to not work properly for the duration of those 20 seconds. If the Gnomish Rocket Boots malfunction, the player will lose control of their movement and the boots will move them in random directions, while also stunning them. The boots also have a chance to root the user in place for 20 seconds. The Gnomish Rocket Boots have a 5-minute cooldown, but they also break after several uses. They have been continuously nerfed since the Burning Crusade, and modern WoW they barely do anything now. The boots are crafted with Gnome Engineering skill of 225, and their recipe can be learned from trainers. Now let's talk about the Goblin Rocket Boots. While very similar to the Gnomish Rocket Boots, there are some important distinctions. The tooltip for the Rocket Boots reads, these dangerous looking boots significantly increase your run speed for 20 seconds. The Goblin Boots provided a slightly faster speed buff than the Gnomish Boots do, but the Goblin Rocket Boots are also prone to exploding. When they do explode, the player's boots are turned into Scorched Rocket Boots, which can be looted to gain a few materials back that were used to craft the item. The Goblin Rocket Boots are created with a Goblin Engineering skill 225 and is taught by the trainers. The cooldown of the boots is 5 minutes as well. While unpredictable, both the Gnomish and Goblin Rocket Boots provided one of the best temporary speed buffs from an item in the game. Fortunately, they were cost so all classes could use them, but you still need to be an engineer to use them as well. As one would expect, they could not be used in arenas or while carrying a flag in battlegrounds. Aside from that, when they do work properly, they're one of the most unique pieces of craftable gear in the game. And at number 4, we have Rocket Boots Extreme. These boots are essentially an improved version of the ones from Classic, but with 3 very big differences. First, these Rocket Boots come from the Burning Crusade and require a skill of 30 in Outland Engineering to craft. Secondly, they are far more reliable than the Gnomish and Goblin Rocket Boots, and they will not break. Finally, the Rocket Boots Extreme really are extreme, as they give the players an 80% increased movement speed for 2.5 seconds. The Rocket Boots Extreme are not without their own limitations, however. Occasionally, they can backfire, igniting the owner on fire briefly. Once again, the player must be a classic and wear leather to use them, and have engineering profession as well. Finally, the schematic for the boots only drops from meching your Steambreaker in the Steam Vault. The drop rate is close to 1%, but luckily the schematic can be sold in the auction house. When the Rocket Boot Extremes are used, the player gains a buff which is called Rocket Boots Engage Ludicrous Speed. This is a reference to the Mel Brooks screwball comedy movie Spaceballs. There is also a similar item called the Rocket Boots Extreme Light. It is almost exactly like the regular Rocket Boots Extreme, but with some major differences. First, the light boots are cloth, not leather, and have lower stats than the regular boots. To reflect this, the schematic calls for 8 bolts of netherweave instead of leather. Finally, the schematic for the rocket boots Extreme Light dropped from Mecha Lord Capacitus, who is a boss in the Megadeer in Tempest Keep. The schematic has a drop rate of 2%. And as a quick fun fact, it wasn't until the final patch of the Burning Crusade, patch 2.4, that the rocket boots had a shared cooldown. And at number 3, we have a trio of special items from around Pandaria. The Bag of Kaffa Beans, Oddly Shaped Horn, and the Tuft of Yak Fur all work similarly but all have slight differences. When used, these items summon a special mount that runs around all by itself in whatever direction you're facing. All these 3 items are in common and all have 3 charges and all last for 20 seconds. As noted in the tooltip for each of these items, this is a very, very fast mount. So fast in fact that they give you a 300% speed increase, which is the same as a flying max speed mount. Now let's break these 3 items down individually. The Bag of Kaffa Beans is an uncommon item with an almost 100% drop rate that can be looted from Zing, which is a rare mob goat in the Kunlun Summit. When used, the item summons a Kaffa Crazed Goat. The Oddly Shaped Horn summons an unruly Sun-Graced Behemoth Mushan. Sun-Graced Behemoths can be found on the border between the Jade Forest and the Valley of the Four Winds, with the drop rate in the horn close to 100%. The final summonable mount is the Angry Yak. This item can drop from Pangsong, a rare elite mob in the Dread Wastes, but it also has a roughly 2.5% chance to drop from any yak mob in the Timeless Isle. The tooltip for the Tuft of Yak Fur says, "It's so fluffy," which is a reference to the movie Despicable Me. What makes all 3 of these items so great and so high in this list is they can be used anywhere outdoors, not just in Pandaria. This means they are great ways to get around from place to place, especially if flying is not allowed. Unfortunately, you cannot loot more than 1 of each item at a time, but still, each of these 3 items are essentially an instant cast mount that lasts for 20 seconds, and they can have a lot of uses, so they're at number 3 on this list. And at number 2, we have the Hook of the Master Angler. This handy trinket, when used, turns into a fish, allowing you to breathe underwater and increasing your swim speed by 35%. The Hook of the Master Angler is one of the 5 prizes only the first place player can choose when they win the Stranglethorn Fishing Extravaganza by handing in the most speckled tasty fish the fastest. This is completed by doing a quest called the Grand Prize. The model of the fish you turn into is a frenzy, which is analogous with the piranha in the real world. The Hook of the Master Angler has been in the game since launch and was only changed in Wrath when it had its cooldown removed and its swim speed increased to 35%, which was a 10% increase from its original 25%. The item isn't the only item in the game that lets you turn into a fish. In Legion, a special blessing on the fishing pole of the Underlight Angler granted a similar effect. The cooldown on the trinket is 1.5 seconds, meaning it can be used quite quickly again, and is one of the items with the fastest cooldown that lets a player change their appearance in the game. A Druid swim form only has a 50% speed increase, so there's no real need for a Druid to use a trinket unless they want to be a fish for some reason. Finally, the Hook of the Master Angler does not break stealth when it's used, which is quite rare. The trinket is so useful in so many applications, especially if you don't want to waste any money on potions for underwater breathing, or don't have access to a Warlock's Unending Breath spell. Because it's so overpowered, the Hook of the Master Angler lands at number 2 on this list. And finally, at number 1, we have the Falling Flame. This unique uncommon item comes from the Timeless Isle in Mist of Pandaria. It is dropped by the rare elite named Cinderfall, who can be found near the broken bridge leading to the Temple of Ordos. This item functions similar to the Hunter ability Disengage, except on a much larger scale. When used, the item launches the player high into the air, sending them hurtling across the sky. It can be quite literally throwing a player across zones and continents, since when aimed correctly, the flying can last for up to a minute. Even better, the item has 50 charges. The item itself applies a knockback power of 999 to the player who uses it. To be honest, I'm not sure how fast the speed is, but it is way faster than any mount. There are 3 downsides to the Falling Flame, however. Although the player will be killed by the fall damage upon impact with the ground, this can be avoided by several means. The most common being deploying a Goblin glider in midair. Another problem with this item is that it has a less than 2% chance to drop from Cinderfall, and that is assuming he's even up. The other downside is the item has a cooldown of 1 hour, so plan your fire meteoring with care. The uses of this item are near infinite, from fast traveling to scaling obstacles to quick escapes. It works nearly everywhere outside and not just in Pandaria. The item is one of the most fun in the entire game and everyone should experience it at least once. To make it even better, you can still move, aim, and change direction while you whiz through the sky, making it way more dynamic and fun than you would expect. This is pure speculation, but this item might be one of the reasons behind adding dragon riding to the game. The Falling Flame is just fun, and it definitely deserves to be the number 1 spawn on this list. Today we'll be looking at the best vertical mobility abilities that players can use in the game, or abilities that allow your character to move in ways that are different from just a normal run speed increase. And also, we won't be looking at toys, profession items, or zone gear items, since they could make another video on their own. These abilities are very handy when trying to get anywhere high or low without taking fall damage. And this video was written while the writer was trying to reach treasures in Zereth Mortis before flying was available. And at number 10, we have the Demon Hunter class ability Double Jump and Glide. There is no big shocker to anyone who's ever seen a Demon Hunter play, but these abilities have a unique usefulness for scaling obstacles and getting down them quickly, and their utility is often forgotten and easily overlooked. Of course, the double jump will only get a Demon Hunter to a rather low elevation compared to some of the other abilities in this video, but it still counts nonetheless. Technically, gliding is not unique to Demon Hunters, since Zandalari Troll players also have the racial ability Pterodactyl Swoop, which functions in a similar manner. However, Pterodactyl Swoop has a 15-minute cooldown, whereas the Demon Hunter's glide ability has a cooldown of 1.5 seconds. Goblin gliders exist and are just as useful, since they're available to all players, and Goblin gliders are always plentiful in the auction house, especially at the beginning of expansion or patch. Gliding is not only useful for avoiding fall damage, but also if you need to quickly get away from enemies and are near a high enough place to jump off of. And at number 9, we have the priest ability Leap of Faith. Leap of Faith instantly pulls the spirit of a party or raid member directly in front of the priest. Only disciplined and holy priests can use Leap of Faith. Added in Cataclysm, Leap of Faith is also sometimes called Life Grip, to contrast it with the DK's ability Death Grip. Leap of Faith can be quite handy if a priest is already high up on a tall spot, and can pull a party member on the ground up to them. Leap of Faith has a 40-yard range, which is quite long, and additionally has a relatively short cooldown of only 90 seconds. The cast time of Leap of Faith is instant, but the act of moving the player is actually not instantaneous, since it takes 1 second. However, Leap of Faith's usefulness is limited to a very small handful of niche situations for movement, since it is principally just an ability for a priest to save a player from dying for whatever reason, be it a mob aggro or falling off of something. There is, however, a Shadowlands legendary called Vault of Heavens, which allows you to do a reverse Leap of Faith, jumping to an ally quickly instead of moving them to you, which makes it much more useful as a movement ability for the priests themselves. Next up at number 8 is the Goblin racial ability Rocket Jump. This ability was added in Cataclysm alongside the Goblin as a playable race for the Horde. The ability has a 90-second cooldown, although it originally had a 2-minute cooldown in Cataclysm. Rocket Jump launches the Goblin forward using the rockets from their belt, and is somewhat similar to a Mage's Blink ability, but in a curved arc. And just a little note, Blink won't be on this list because we don't really count it as a vertical mobility ability. Anyways, while Rocket Jump usually does not work when trying to travel uphill, it can be used to reduce fall damage. Rocket Jump, if used while falling, resets the top of your fall to when you jumped. So if you jump from a high cliff, then use Rocket Jump near the ground, you'll take little to no fall damage. Unfortunately, this ability removes any slow falling effects upon its use, because Blizzard hates fun. Another drawback to Rocket Jump is that it also shares a cooldown with another Goblin racial ability named Rocket Barrage, which is just a simple DPS ability. So you have to pick between either doing a little bit of extra damage or being able to use your Rocket Jump. And at number 7, we have a two-way tie between Disengage and Vengeful Retreat. First up, we have the ability Disengage. This is a baseline hunter ability that's learned at level 4 and has a 20-second cooldown. This ability allows hunters to jump backwards from their position and land behind them, which is very useful for getting away from enemies quickly. Disengage has been in the game since vanilla, but it was just an ability hunters could use to avoid threat back then. At the beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, Disengage was redesigned and allowed the hunter to leap backwards up to 13 yards with a 30-second cooldown. In Mists of Pandaria, it was changed again so the hunter no longer had to be in combat in order to use the ability, and it was reduced to a 20-second cooldown. Disengage can be even more useful when used near the ground after a long fall, as it can also be used to reduce or prevent fall damage. Disengage can be given a small speed boost by selecting level 40 talent Post Haste, which frees the hunter from all movement impairing effects and increases the hunter's movement speed by 50%. On our second entry at number 7, we have the Vengeful Retreat. This ability is similar to Disengage because it primarily functions in the same manner by making the player leap backwards. Vengeful Retreat is a Havoc Demon Hunter ability with a cooldown of 25 seconds, and was added in Legion with the Demon Hunter class. Vengeful Retreat has an instant cast time and removes all snares from the player and sends the player flying backwards. Vengeful Retreat can have its cooldown reduced by 5 seconds if the player has chosen the level 50 talent Momentum. The ability also damages nearby enemies when used, and decreases the enemy movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds. The fact that Vengeful Retreat also damages enemies is the main difference between it and Disengage. Vengeful Retreat can be learned at level 10 and is great for demon hunters because it works perfectly alongside the other mobility abilities such as the previously mentioned double jump and glide abilities, which makes demon hunters one of the most mobile classes in the game. A demon hunter can very easily use Vengeful Retreat and then turn around and glide in midair, for example. The main drawbacks to Disengage and Vengeful Retreat are that they can be hard to see and control where you will end up when you jump backwards. Turning the camera around might make things easier, but this can still be tricky to get down perfectly every time. Using these two abilities that leap the player backwards also requires some experience before you can nail them down. Additionally, none of these abilities give great height, none of them have more than one charge, and all have 20 to 30 second cooldowns, since these abilities were made for the flight in the fight or flight. Finally, both Disengage and Vengeful Retreat usually cannot work going uphill. It can be argued that these abilities are cheesed since they were not intended to be used in this way, Due to their very nature, they land at the low end of this list due to their somewhat unpredictable and slightly off-kiltering feeling when used in this manner. At the end of the day, they are mobility abilities which can give you some elevation, so there's no qualms about trying to use them to your advantage. And at number 6, we have a handful of 3 rogue teleportation abilities, which are Killing Spree, Shadow Step, and Shadow Strike. The first ability is Killing Spree, which was added in Wrath. This is a level 50 outlaw talent which allows the rogue to teleport to an enemy and damage it. However, it not only requires a target enemy, but it also has a pretty short range of only 10 yards and a cooldown of 2 minutes. The next ability is Shadow Step, a level 18 ability for both Assassination and Subtlety rogues. This is pretty much just a teleportation ability with no DPS mechanics, as it simply teleports you to your target and gives you a speed boost, and giving you the option to target an ally or enemy. Shadow Step has a pretty short cooldown of only 30 seconds and a range of 25 yards, which is a lot more than Killing Spree. Shadow Step was added in the game in the Burning Crusade, and there's even a PvP talent called Silhouette, which reduces its cooldown by 2/3 when you cast it on an ally. The final rogue teleport ability is Shadow Strike. This is a level 12 subtlety rogue ability added in Legion. Shadow Strike allows for a stealthy subtlety rogue to appear behind the target from up to 25 yards away and deal 25% additional damage. There's not much more to discuss here other than more often than not, these abilities don't work when trying to cross great vertical distances. But small vertical distances, they usually do okay with. And at number 5, we have the Druid ability Wild Charge, which is a level 25 talent ability that's been in the game since Mists of Pandaria. This ability grants a movement ability that varies based on the player's shapeshifting form. Wild Charge has a 15-second cooldown and a total of 5 different abilities depending on whether the player shapeshifted or what form they're in, and has a range of 5 to 25 yards. If a Druid is non-shapeshifted, Wild Charge allows them to target a nearby ally and fly to their position, similar to a reverse leap of faith. In aquatic form, Wild Charge increases swim speed by an additional 150% for 5 seconds. In bear form, Wild Charge functions like Charge, in that it lets the Druid charge to an enemy as well as immobilizing them for 4 seconds. In cat form, Wild Charge will make the Druid leap behind an enemy, dazing them for 3 seconds. However, there must be an enemy for a Druid to be able to leap to, and that enemy must be in their line of sight. In Moonkin form, Wild Charge functions similarly to Disengage, Eventual Retreat, and Rocket Jump, in that it bounds the player backwards 15 to 25 yards. Finally, in Travel form, Wild Charge enables the Druid to leap forward 20 yards. And because of the different ways this ability grants vertical mobility, it definitely deserves a high spot on this list. But the next couple of spots are just a little bit more useful or iconic. And at number 4, we have the baseline warrior ability, Charge. This ability allows players to quickly reach a target no matter in which direction, and can usually allow a player to race up hills or other unclimbable obstacles on a 20-second cooldown. The ability's description reads, Charge rapidly moves the warrior towards the target within an 8 to 25 yard range, rooting it for 1.5 seconds, and generates 10 to 20 rage. Charge has been in the game since vanilla WoW, and its only significant change was that it was changed from a stun effect to a root effect in Warlords of Draenor, and of course usable in combat. The other main benefit from Charge besides its mobility boost is it can sometimes reduce fall damage. It is possible to charge while midair, while jumping, while falling, or while suffering knockback. This can save the warrior's life if they're being knocked over a cliff, or simply save fall damage and time otherwise wasted returning to combat. Charge can additionally be augmented by the level 30 warrior ability Double Time, which adds a second additional charge, as well as reducing its cooldown by 3 seconds. A somewhat similar ability to Charge in another warrior's ability is named Intervene. This ability is learned at level 43 and allows the warrior to run at high speed towards an ally, intercepting all melee and range attacks against them for 6 seconds while they remain within 10 yards. Warriors also have the ability Execute. This ability is learned at level 10 and can only be used on targets below 20% health. Death Sentence is a PvP talent that allows the warrior to use Execute itself as a charge. Death Sentence has a short cooldown of only 6 seconds. And if Death Sentence is used alongside Double Time, this essentially means a warrior can have 3 charges, at least in theory and in PvP. Demon Hunters also have an ability similar to Charge called Fellblades. Fellblade is essentially the same ability as Charge, but with a demonic twist and does not root the target. Fellblade is a level 15 talent and has a cooldown of 15 seconds. And at number 3, we have a different warrior ability, Heroic Leap, which allows a player to jump to a targeted location. It also deals all damage to enemies within 8 yards and has a 45-second cooldown. Fury Warriors also have a PvP talent called Barbarian, which grants another Heroic Leap for free if cast within 3 seconds, and increases the damage of Heroic Leap by 200%. There is also the talent Bounding Stride, which reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds while buffing your speed by 70% for 3 seconds after leaping. But that isn't even all. There's also the legendary Power Leaper, which gives you 2 extra charges of the spell, which was originally a Legion legendary power called Timeless Stratagem. So, if you wish to leap and run around like a bloody jackrabbit in PvP with 6 leaps giving a 70% speed boost for 3 seconds each, go wild I guess. Heroic Leap was added in Cataclysm and still remains one of the most useful mobility abilities for warriors to this day. Heroic Leap has 2 other reskins which we'll discuss before moving on to the numbers 2 and 1 spots. First up is Grappling Hook, an outlaw rogue ability which is learned at level 18. This ability allows a rogue to launch a grappling hook which pulls the player to the target location. The grappling hook has a 40-yard range with a 1-minute cooldown that was added in Legion. This ability can be modified with a level 25 talent Retractable Hook, which reduces the cooldown of grappling hook by 15 seconds and increases its retraction speed. Next up is the Demon Hunter ability Metamorphosis, which is learned at level 10. The Havoc version of this ability allows a Demon Hunter to leap 40 yards and turn into a demon, gaining several DPS buffs. Metamorphosis has remained the same since Demon Hunters were introduced in Legion and can be very useful for getting uphill, since it's essentially the Demon Hunter's Heroic Leap, although on a rather long cooldown of 4 minutes, and the version that allows you to leap is limited to Havoc only, which is not really a good way to get height. So why is it even mentioned? Well, with that, we lead into the actual Heroic Leap lookalike, Infernal Strike. An ability granted to Vengeance Demon Hunters, this ability works like the Heroic Leap really. 20-second cooldown, 2 charges, 30-yard range, leap to a location and do an AoE. However, while it has far less support than Heroic Leap, it does have the Abyssal Strike talent, which causes it to do a fair bit of extra AoE damage. But in this case, more importantly, reduces its cooldown by 8 seconds down to only 12. Pairing this with the ability to double jump and glide, this easily makes Vengeance Demon Hunters the most versatile spec for movement, even more so in PvP, at least for just the Demon Hunter that is. And at number 2, we have the baseline Warlock ability Demonic Gateway. Demonic Gateway is an iconic Warlock ability which creates a pair of 2 portals. Clicking on one portal will quickly transport you to the other one. The portals can be placed anywhere between 10 to 40 yards away, and can be placed at different elevations or even over gaps, making it one of the most useful mobility abilities in the entire game. Demonic Gateway can be handy in almost every situation, such as skipping mob packs in Mythic Plus dungeons, quickly escaping one-shot mechanics in raids, or quickly moving the flag across the battleground Warsong Gulch. It also is heavily used in World First raids to the point where it was actually mandatory for a lot of fights, like Mythic Kill Jaden in the Tomb of Sargeras, and Painsmith in SOD. Demonic Gateway was added in Mists of Pandaria and is currently learned by Warlocks at level 49. The ability has a 2-second cast and 10-second cooldown. The cooldown doesn't really matter, however, since the major downside to Demonic Gateway is it has a 90-second lockout after being used. After a player has used the gateway once, they get a debuff which reads, faded into the nether and unable to use another Demonic Gateway. This debuff even persists through death, which stops any kind of death cheese you might try with it. Demonic Gateway's cooldown distance travel can be increased using the PvP talent Gateway Mastery. This talent increases Demonic Gateway's range by 20 yards, reduces the cast time by 30%, and reduces the time between how often players can take the Demonic Gateway by 15 seconds. Another downside to Demonic Gateway is that it also has a cast time, so it technically can be interrupted by damage, interrupts, or movement. Although if you really hate this downside, there is the Pillars of the Dark Portal legendary power, originally from a pair of Legion legendary pants of the same name. This legendary makes your Demonic Gateway instant cast, and the first use of it not triggering the cooldown, paired with the fact that while you travel through the gate, any enemies you come into contact with are knocked away. In the recent expansion of Shadowlands, there has been 2 major changes to Demonic Gateway. The first being a change to its line of sight freedom, now requiring line of sight to work. It has become far less abusable, no longer letting you, for example, skip through the log in Mist of Tirad Scythe. However, to compensate, it gained the special ability to go over pits and gaps, no longer suffering from the no path found limitations of other abilities. The other change being an item called the Gateway Control Shard, an item which can be purchased for 100 gold and put in your bags, bars, and macros, allowing you to set a hotkey to use this item, which when activated will activate the closest Demonic Gateway in range, fix it an old issue many raiders have, of trying to click on the portal that everyone in the entire raid was stacking on top of as well. Lastly, before we move on to number 1, did you know Demonic Gateway originally had health and resilience? A default 70-yard range was activated by walking into it, and had limited charges that refreshed over time. It's kind of crazy how much this ability has changed from the launch of Mists of Pandaria to the launch of WoD, and then not to change much at all since then. And finally, at number 1, we have the Door of Shadows ability from the Venthyr Covenant. Door of Shadows can transport a player up to 35 yards away. It has a 1.5 second cast time and a recharge time of 1 minute. Door of Shadows is incredibly useful for climbing up hills and obstacles, and can sometimes pass right through them. It was by far the best ability to collect treasures in Zereth Mortis before flying came out. Additionally, Door of Shadows is available to all classes, since any class can join the Venthyr Covenant, unlike all the other abilities listed in this video so far, which are all class specific. So while this ability is very simple and does the same as some of the other abilities like Heroic Leap and Infernal Strike, even with the downside of requiring a cast time, the fact any and every class and spec can use this carries the ability hard, as all of them require you to move to specific specs or even reroll to a class to use. This ability can simply be picked up in Ouroboros and used as needed, then swap back no problem. This is made even better with all the customizations you can use in order to buff the ability from the Soulbind trees. Intimidation Tactics to buff its cooldown speed by 3 times if you're below 50% health. Enduring Gloom to cause it to give you a 20% health shield for 8 seconds after being cast. Watch the Shoes, which causes it to free you from roots and snares. Fancy Footwork, which causes it to increase your movement speed by 40%, decaying over 6 seconds after use. Agent of Chaos, disorienting enemies nearby when you appear for 6 seconds. And best of all, Leisurely Gait, which gives it 2 charges at the cost of an increased 30-second cooldown per charge. And made even better with the first Sigil Trinket, resetting the cooldown of your Covenant signature ability, Door of Shadows included, although on a 5-minute cooldown. This ability is at number 1 because it avoids the downsides of many of the other abilities on this list, while also just being usable in all classes. In the beta, there was a Soulbind that made this ability instant cast, which was quickly removed as it made the ability way more powerful than all the other Covenant abilities in pretty much all forms of content. In this video, we'll be going over the best teleportation abilities that are unique to classes or races. This video is about long-distance teleportation abilities, since short-distance teleportation abilities, like the Venthyr Door of Shadows, were covered in another video. And also, nothing that's available to all classes, so no engineers with their wormholes or necrolords with their Hearth's Kidney Stone. And at number 10, we have the warrior ability from Legion called Jump to Skyhold. This spell has a cast time of 4.3 seconds and is the only way warriors can get to and from their class order hall, named Skyhold. This ability can only be cast when the player is in a circle of light and has the buff called Odin's Gaze. The flavor text for the spell reads, "Jump into the sky, landing in the halls of valor." When a warrior is in a circle of light near Valkyrie of Odin with the buff on them, the warrior will get an extra action button which will instantly appear. Once in Skyhold, warriors can talk to a Valkyrie and choose which of the Broken Isle zones they want to go to. Upon clicking the destination zone, there is a neat visual upon descending, similar to the one players see when falling down into the Maw from Oribos in the Shadowlands. All of this means warriors essentially have a free teleportation to any zone the Broken Isles from their order hall, so as long as they have them all unlocked and are above level 12. The main downside to this system of teleportation is that there is only one location per zone where this ability can be performed, meaning the player must still travel to wherever the closest one is. In Dalaran, the Circle of Light is next to the Lightforge Beacon, which is next to the Flight Master in Dalaran. In Azuna, the Jump to Skyhold Circle of Light is near Azure Wing Repose. In Val'Sharah, it's near Lorlithil. In High Mountain, it's near Thunder Totem. In Stormheim, it's near Valdasal. In Siramar, it's near Meridil. And the last one can be found in the Broken Shore. Each of these spots is unlocked only after the player arrives in the area or completes several quests in the zone. Jump to Skyhold's number 10 on this list for a handful of reasons. Technically, Jump to Skyhold is not a teleport, rather a jump, even though upon ascending the load screen is instantaneous. Additionally, Jump to Skyhold is only useful for traveling in the Broken Isles, and is not applicable to any other continent, world, or plane, which is a heavy drawback. And at number 9, we have the Scroll of Teleport Ravenhold. This item allows the player to teleport to Ravenhold Manor in Hillsbrat Foothills. This scroll has a 1-hour cooldown and is reusable an infinite number of times. While technically a Scroll of Teleport is not a racial or class ability, what makes the Scroll of Teleport Ravenhold unique and on this list is that it can only be used by rogues, because it can only be found in the Rogue Order Hall, located in the Broken Isles in Dalaran, named the Hall of Shadows. The scroll can be picked up from the vault in the Hall of Shadows once the players have reached the Class Order Hall upgrade. The scroll was added to the game in patch 7.0 and is bind on pickup, meaning it cannot be sold in the auction house or traded. Therefore, only rogues are able to use this item since only rogues can go into the Rogue Order Hall, and since the scroll cannot be sold or traded to other players. The scroll is useful because it provides a fast way to get to Ravenhold Manor and the Ravenhold faction. The main questline the Ravenhold faction offers is rogue only. Ravenhold Manor is briefly visited in Legion by rogues while questing, and is a quest location for the legendary set of daggers and Cataclysm called the Fangs of the Father, also for a Wintervale daily. Rogues are also needed to get revered and exalted with the Ravenhold faction, as only they can unlock and open the heavy junk boxes from the quest junk boxes needed. Getting exalted with Ravenhold is one of the criteria needed for the feat of strength Insane in the Membrane, which awards the title the Insane. This is one of the most difficult and time-consuming rep grinds in the entire game. So, seeing as several aspects of Ravenhold Manor are rogue-specific, it makes sense why this teleport ability can be found in the Hall of Shadows. And at number 8, we have the Death Knight ability, Death Gate. This ability allows a DK to summon a portal to Acheris the Ebon Hold, which is a floating necropolis in the Eastern Plaguelands. In Legion, Acheris moved along with Dalaran to the Broken Isles to help spearhead the assault against the Burning Legion. The spell itself takes 4 seconds to cast and spawns a very cool-looking portal. Additionally, Death Gate only has a 1-minute cooldown, which is a very short cooldown for what is essentially a flavored mage portal. When Death Gate is used in Acheris, it conveniently returns the player to wherever they previously were when they first cast it to get there. Death Gate is learned at level 10. The main use for the Death Gate is so the DK can visit a rune forge to inscribe their weapons with runes to enhance their combat capabilities. As of 9.2, there are 8 runes which provide different effects. Among these effects are runes to increase damage, runes to increase armor, restore HP, along with other various effects. The Acherus in Eastern Plaguelands is not a great transportation hub, so this teleport is more of a classic mechanic than a useful teleport for traveling around the world. However, the Acherus in Legion is a short flight from Dalaran, essentially making the Legion Deathgate a second Dalaran Hearthstone with a much shorter cooldown. From Dalaran, the faction hubs of Orgrimmar and Stormwind are one portal away, meaning the DKs essentially have 2 different base Hearthstones. And at number 7, we have the Shaman ability Astral Recall. Astral Recall is learned at level 32, and its flavor tech reads, yanks you through the twisty nether back to your Hearthstone location. The Astral Recall ability is essentially another Hearthstone for Shamans, and it has 3 main benefits. The first benefit is that Astral Recall only has a 10-minute cooldown. It used to have a 15-minute cooldown, but that was changed in Legion. Secondly, Astral Recall doesn't share this cooldown with regular Hearthstones, meaning Shamans can have 2 Hearthstones. Finally, if a Shaman is in the Restoration or Elemental specializations, and has obtained the Spearwalker's Grace ability at level 44, they can use this ability to cast Astral Recall while moving. There are some drawbacks to Astral Recall, however. First, it is always set to your Hearthstone location, meaning both your Hearthstone and Astral Recall will always take you to the same innkeeper. Secondly, it has a long cast time of 10 seconds. However, Astral Recall benefits from the haste stat, meaning you can reduce its cast time with more haste stat from gear and other spells. However, Astral Recall does have 2 major downsides. First, it cannot be used while shapeshifted, which is a huge disappointment because the Ghost Wolf form is amazing for Shamans with its mobility and speed. And biggest of all, it can't be used in combat, which means there's no mid-combat Astral Recall to avoid dying. There was once also a glyph called Glyph of Astral Fixation, added in Mists of Pandaria, that made your Astral Recall instead take you to Stormwind or Orgrimmar, allowing you to have your Astral Recall in a separate place from your Hearthstone. However, this was sadly removed in Legion. There's not much else to say about Astral Recall, other than that it's the only class teleportation ability to specifically mention it as a second Hearthstone, since it puts the location to your current Hearthstone it's set in the tooltip for Astral Recall. All the other class teleportation abilities, such as the DK's Deathgate, always returns the player to the same location, regardless of wherever their Hearthstone may be set to. Thus, Shamans are the only class with 2 innate Hearthstones. And at number 6, we have the Warlock ability Ritual of Summoning. This is one of the most common and fastest ways to transport players around the world in WoW. The flavor text for the spell reads, begins a ritual to create a summoning portal, requiring the caster and 2 of the allies to complete. This portal can be used to summon party and raid members. Ritual of Summoning is used ubiquitously throughout the game, from raids to battlegrounds to the open world, and is one of the characteristic spells of the Warlock class. And while raids and dungeons have summoning stones that only need 2 people at the entrance to summon people, the Ritual of Summoning lets you summon people anywhere, even places without stones, including deep inside of a raid or dungeon, preventing you from having to run all the way back to the entrance, summon, and then run all the way back. It even works in Mythic Plus, in case you're in a dungeon with a horribly long run back, or the risk of someone running back and pulling extra mobs. The Ritual Summoning ability has a cooldown of 2 minutes, although it stays active for about 3 minutes, meaning you won't really ever have to worry about waiting on the cooldown ever, and it's learned upon reaching level 33. The major drawback to the Ritual Summoning is that it requires 2 players and a Warlock to complete, meaning this teleport can only be done while in a group. Most long-distance teleportations is for single-player activities, such as running old raids or going to daily questing hubs or another continent. That's not to say people don't only do old content alone, but just that it is more often the case than not. Thus, this ability is quite useless if you're not in a group or raid, since it will not work, and therefore, it is of no help at all for a single player to teleport long distances. Because it requires the player to be in a willing and helpful group, Ritual Summoning is only the number 6 spot. And at number 5, we have the Monk class ability Zen Pilgrimage. This ability allows monks to return to either the Peak of Serenity in the Kunlun Summit, or the Monk Order Hall in the Wandering Isle. Zen Pilgrimage has a 1-minute cooldown, a 10-second cast time, and one very cool animation. If the monk has not done the intro Legion quests, they can always teleport to the Peak of Serenity in Pandaria. During the Monk Legion intro, the Peak of Serenity is heavily damaged, and the monks decide to set up their operations on the Wandering Isle. Both the Peak of Serenity and the Temple of Five Dawns, the Monk Order Hall, have portals to various cities. In the Peak of Serenity, there's a portal to both Orgrimmar and Stormwind. This means a monk can simply cast Zen Pilgrimage, and then once in the Peak of Serenity, click on the portal to the respective faction hub. This is great for getting around the world from far away and remote places. In the Temple of Five Dawns, there's a portal to both the Peak of Serenity, which is located about halfway down the steps on the right side, as well as a portal to Legion Dalaran at the bottom of the steps. Legion Dalaran also has its own set of portals to Orgrimmar and Stormwind. Similar to the DK Deathgate, monks can cast the ability again from within their home temple to return to where they were originally cast Zen Pilgrimage from. This ability is unsurprisingly called Zen Pilgrimage Return. Zen Pilgrimage Return is an instant cast, which is nice not having to spend 10 seconds to cast it again. Interestingly, Zen Pilgrimage Return can be cast at level 1, but Zen Pilgrimage is not learned until level 11. And at number 3, we have the Druid ability Dreamwalk. Druids have always been able to teleport to Moonglade, and in Legion, the Moonglade teleport ability was replaced with the Dreamwalk ability. Both Teleport Moonglade and Dreamwalk have a cast time of 10 seconds, like most teleportation abilities in the game. Teleport Moonglade is automatically learned at level 22 and is replaced by Dreamwalk when the Druid does the intro class Order Hall quest in Legion. The Dreamwalk ability allows Druids to teleport to the Emerald Dream, where there are several portals at different places in Azeroth. In the Portal Ring, there are portals to several world trees across Azeroth, which makes Dreamwalk a very handy way of moving around the world. Among the locations offered by these portals include the Druid Order Hall called Dreamgrove in Val'sharah in the Broken Isles, Nordrassil in Mount Hyjal, the Great Tree in Veralis, the remains of Vordrassil in Grizzly Hills, the Great Tree in the Hinterlands, and the Great Tree in Duskwood. There is also another portal, Moonglade, so you don't have to worry about Dreamwalk replacing the Teleport Moonglade ability. The Druid Order Hall has a portal to Dalaran, which is directly connected to the faction hubs of Stormwind and Orgrimmar, which means the Dreamwalk can also act as a second Dalaran Hearthstone. One significant drawback to Dreamwalk is that there's no portals to Pandaria, any BFA zones, any Outland or Wards of Draenor zones within the Emerald Dream. Additionally, many of these portal destinations are not really useful, since there's not much max level content to do around them, seeing as most of these great trees are in far, remote, and desolate corners of Azeroth. For example, although a Druid can teleport to Veralis at any time they want, why would they want to? Dreamwalk is such a cool concept, but it's a shame how little of an actual impact it has on gameplay. Blizzard should add more Dreamwalking portals to the world, like maybe in the Zandalari Druid Temple, the Thorn Speakers in Kul Tiras, and maybe even one to Ardenwald. Just a bit of something to spice up each expansion and keep Dreamwalk relevant. And at number 4, we have the Vulpera ability Return to Camp. This ability is for all intents and purposes a second Hearthstone. Even better, unlike Astral Recall, this ability can set up the secondary Hearthstone location anywhere in WoW, so long as it is in the open world. Full players need to cast the ability Make Camp to set the spawn point. Upon doing so, a cute little tent and campfire pops up from them, and the player receives a buff called Camping. Make Camp has a cast time of 5 seconds and only a 10-minute cooldown. To return to the place where they cast Make Camp, Vulpera players must use the ability called Return to Camp. Upon loading back to where they made the camp, a Vulpera caravan pulled by llamas will drop off the player back to the little campfire and tent. Return to Camp has a 10-second cast time and a cooldown of 1 hour. The 1 hour cooldown is by far the greatest detriment to this ability. Even a regular Hearthstone only has a 30-minute cooldown, or a 15-minute cooldown if you're a guild with the Hasty Hearth perk. A secondary Hearthstone to wherever the player desires is a massive blessing, and Blizzard should seriously consider making something like this a baseline ability for all players. For example, the writer of this video uses his Hearthstone to get to the Shadowlands Covenant, and has the Vulpera camp in Orgrimmar because he's too lazy to grind Animef or an alt for the tier 3 portal network. The Garrison Hearthstone and Dalaran Hearthstone are useful, but where they teleport the player cannot be changed. WoW is almost 20 years old at this point, and having another Hearthstone ability to set anywhere separate from the regular Hearthstone would be a major convenience. Hopefully Return to Camp is the first iteration of something like this. And at number 3, we have the Mole Machine ability, which is a Dark Iron Dwarf racial ability. When the player uses this ability, it summons a mole machine that the players can click on and then choose a destination to go to. The Dark Iron Mole Machine has a cast time of 5 seconds, despawns after 3 minutes, and has a cooldown of 30 minutes. The player by default knows 3 locations, Ironforge, Stormwind, and the Shadowforge City. Throughout the world, there are also other mole machines that the player can click on and discover them, allowing the player to access any of these spots. There are mole machines in 17 zones, with usually 2 or 3 per continent. We'll briefly list them all, and here they are. Ares Peak in the Hinterlands, Blackrock Mountain, Netherguard Keep in the Blasted Lands, Ungoro Crater, the Southern Barrens, Mount Hyjal, Blade Edge Mountain, Shadowmoon Valley, Honor Hold and Hellfire Peninsula, the Argent Tournament Grounds and Icecrown, the Ruby Dragon Shrier and Dragonblight, Stormstout Brewery in the Valley of the Four Winds, Coonline Summit, Blackrock Foundry and Gorgron, the Elemental Plateau in the alternate Draenor Nagran, Netherleon's Vault and High Mountain, and finally there's one in the Broken Shore. Perhaps Blizz will add more location options in the future, but this is already one of the best ways to get around the world easily and fast. Being able to go to so many places at the click of a button with only a 30-minute cooldown is an amazing utility teleportation ability and one of the most unique racial abilities that has ever been added to the game. And at number 1, we have the Mage Teleports. This is unsurprising since mages can not only teleport themselves to major cities and a handful of other places, but they can also form portals for any group members to use as well. Mage Teleport casts are 10-second long and usually require 3% of the player's mana. The Mage Teleport ability is learned automatically at level 21. But mages must visit portal trainers to learn teleportation destinations, which makes them one of the only classes in the game that can still learn things from their class trainers. Both Alliance and Horde mages can learn the following teleports: Dalaran Broken Isles, Dalaran Northrend, Hall of the Guardian, which is the Mage Legion Order Hall, and Oribos. While both factions can learn teleports to Shattrath's city ability, each faction's side is slightly different as it teleports a player to a different location in Shattrath. Specific teleportation destinations that are exclusive to Alliance mages are Baradin Base Camp on Tol Barad, Borealis, Darnassus, Exodar, Ironforge, Stormshield, Stormwind, Theramore, and the Veil of Eternal Blossoms at the Shrine of Seven Stars. Specific teleportation destinations that are exclusive to the Horde mages are Dazara Lore, Orgrimmar, Silvermoon, Stonard, which is a small encampment near the entrance of the Blasted Lands in the southern Swamp of Sorrows, Thunderbluff, Hellscream's Grass, and Tol Barad, Undercity, the Veil of Eternal Blossom at the Shrine of Two Moons, and Warspear. Additionally, there is one more secret teleport that mages can learn called Ancient Teleport Dalaran. This teleport brings the mage into the middle of the air above the crater of Dalaran and Hillsbrad Foothills, where the city used to be before it teleported to Northrend and Wrath, and then the Broken Isles and Legion. This ability can only be learned from the ancient tome of teleportation, Dalaran. Teleporting to Dalaran's old location will put you quite a ways up in the sky, so make sure you don't teleport anyone to their death. I mean, it's not like anyone would ever do that intentionally. During Legion, there was also a portal in Dalaran to this location located in the Chamber of the Guardian, with a sign in front of it reading, "Warning, drop." To get this item, a mage must go to the Scarlet Halls dungeon, defeat Flameweaver Kolger without allowing him to burn any books with one of the fight mechanics, loot his corpse, and then the Ancient Tome of Teleportation Dalaran from one of the bookcases in the boss room. After this, mages can also buy the Ancient Tome of Portal Dalaran from Endora Moonhead in Northrend Dalaran. However, this item has a limited supply, so it might not always be available. Most mage portals can be learned at level 21 if the mage has talked to the correct portal trainer and has enough gold. The only exceptions to this rule are the Ancient Teleport Dalaran ability, which requires level 28, and as of Shadowlands, the Teleport Orbo spell, which cannot be learned until level 52. The Mage Teleport ability is an iconic class ability and one of the most useful abilities in the entirety of WoW, hands down, making this number 1 spot a no-brainer. Although be careful, as it's common for mages to troll their allies by placing multiple portals stacked on top of each other, in-game commonly known as the Portal Roulette. Maybe you end up in Undercity, maybe the Shrine of the Two Moons, maybe Warspear, or maybe you fall to your death. And hey, as we end this video, if you want the best character ever for getting around the world, play a Dark Iron Dwarf Mage with Engineering, and you will never have any problems with getting around the many lands of Warcraft. Microtransactions are something that's become almost a guaranteed part of games these days. However, back in the days of 2004 when WoW first launched, they weren't even thought of. Or were they? And of course, for the purposes of this video, a microtransaction is an in-game item that is either made easier to obtain or is only obtainable through a real money purchase. First, let's start in 2004. The very second WoW Vanilla launched, and we already have microtransactions. Starting with the Collector's Edition, a more expensive version of the base game that came with many real-life items, like a mousepad, an art book, some music discs, etc., etc. However, it also came with an in-game good, one of 3 pets of your choice to all of your characters. A little Diablo from Diablo, a little Zergling from StarCraft, or a baby panda from Warcraft's Pandaren? These 3 pets were, and still are, only attainable by buying the WoW Vanilla's Collector's Edition. This has caused some issues recently, as WoW Classic and Retail are, as Blizzard have said, 100% separate entities. However, if you have the Retail Collector's Edition, you also get these pets in Classic WoW, meaning over 15 years later with the re-release of Vanilla WoW in WoW Classic, the only way to get these pets on the new Classic WoW is to pay a few $1,000s to buy an unopened Vanilla Collector's Edition. And really, Collector's Editions would come for every expansion afterwards, and with little to no changes other than what general rewards were given. Then we move on to 2005, the first real year of WoW. And well, what do we have? A new style of microtransactions, the BlizzCon items. This being the Murky Egg, which summoned the famous Murky Companion, obtained from going to BlizzCon, which was quite expensive really. Tickets were a fair price, and most players you needed to buy plane tickets, a hotel room, and much more simply just to go to BlizzCon to get the code required. That or buy one offline and hope that you didn't get scammed. Then with 2006 and the soon coming arrival of TBC, we got a few new things. First, we got the first character service, Realm Transfer. For a price, this allowed characters to transfer their characters from one server to another. However, having a 6-month cooldown per character only lowered many years later. Meaning you could not transfer willy-nilly. Some would say this was the first nail in the coffin for server identity. Got a reputation for being a scumbag ninja looter? Then just realm transfer. The next new microtransaction was a cross-promotion. WoW was becoming huge, and with this they decided to make a trading card game. And to help sell this, they added special loot cards to the TCG. These cards had a rare chance of being found in specific card expansions, and could be redeemed in-game in WoW. Many of these could even be sold at the auction house, meaning, in a way, you could now exchange real-life money for in-game gold without the risk of getting banned for buying stuff off of a shifty website. The first expansion was the Heroes of Azeroth, and had the Tabard of the Flame, the Hippogriff Hatchling Pet, and the Riding Turtle mount. Before we move on, couple cool facts about the Riding Turtle. When it was first added, it had no use. It was the same speed as the default run speed, and in some cases was even slower, and it was not until much later on when it got a swim speed added to it. Another cool fact is that in Warlords of Draenor, this was the only TCG mount made available in-game, now able to be fished up in the garrison's fishing pond, made hilariously easy with the fishing parties of the Legion pre-patch cross-realm grouping. Now, on to the year of 2007, and with the launch of TBC, we had a collector's edition again, giving a pet. However, instead of a choice of 3 pets, you got one specific one, a Nether Drake Whelp pet. However, EU players, as a bug, got the Lurky pet, a white baby Murloc as well. This was a bug that Blizzard decided not to fix as it was too late by the time they'd notice. Then after that, we had another BlizzCon thing, this time giving a toy instead of a pet called the Murloc costume. Using this, put on a horribly made Murloc costume wielding a BlizzCon flag. And lastly, we had a whopping 3 TCG expansions with loot cards in them. Through the Dark Portal contained a toy picnic basket, a pet banana charm that summoned a pet monkey, and an Impinaball toy acting like a magic 8-ball. Then we got the Fires of Outland expansion that had a Goblin Gumbo kettle toy, a fishing chair toy, and the legendary Reigns of the Swift Spectral Tiger mount, going for a whopping $8,000 these days. Then, lastly, March of the Legion. This had a paper flying machine, a rocket chicken pet, and the dragon kite pet. As you can see, the TCG really has started to kick up the amount of items on this list. Eventually, in BlizzCon Online 2021, they gave out a similar Nether Drake Whelp pet, again as a promotion for TBC Classic as part of one of their bundles, in reminiscent of the TBC Collector's Edition. Anyways, lastly, for the year 2007, we got the name change character surface added to the store. 2008, the year of Wrath of the Lich King, and of course, the Wrath of the Lich King's Collector's Edition, containing the pet Frosty, a little skeletal dragon whelp. And for this year's BlizzCon, we got the Blizzard Bear mount, with a small baby Murloc on its back waving a BlizzCon flag. But wait, we also had this thing called the World of Warcraft Invitational, a big WoW tournament separate from BlizzCon. And this year, if you traveled there and bought a ticket, you would get the Tyrael's Hilt, that summoned a small Tyrael companion from Diablo. This was the only reward ever from this event, as soon after the event would just be merged into BlizzCon. Next, of course, we have the TCG rewards, another 3 expansions, the Servants of the Betrayer, which contain the Goblin Weather Machine toy, the X51 Nether Rocket Extreme mount. Funnily enough, it's the mount used for Wowhead's icon. And lastly, the Papa Hummel's Pet Biscuits, allowing you to double your companion pet size. And this was actually a consumable, and you only got 50 of them from the loot card, so you could eventually just run out. Although this card was rather common, so it was not too much of a deal. Although they later on added an in-game item that can be obtained that did exactly the same thing. So save the money, go to the Timeless Isle and buy some, or just do pet battle events as they drop like candy from pet loot bags you obtain from all forms of pet battle content. Next, we have the Hunt for Illidan expansion, giving you the Disco toy, the Soul Trade Beacon, which summoned an ethereal pet, actually acting as a vendor, just not one you could sell anything to, and while summoned, allowing you to gather a special currency for killing things that is used to buy stuff from the vendor, a cosmetic set that looks like ethereal bandages, some neat stuff like alcohol, and a ball to throw to your friends, or alter your companion's appearance, and the biggest thing being a potion that allowed you to see lesser invisibility. This could possibly be seen as pay to win, but it's not. And then the Path of the Illidan, another consumable item. This left a fail trail behind you for 5 minutes, and came with 100 charges. Lastly, the Drums of War expansion, which contained the Flag of the Ownership toy, the Big Battle Bear mount, and 100 party grenades, an item they made pretty easy to get in-game later on in WoW. You can see a bit of a trend now. they are adding a few consumable items. However, as the TCG was later discontinued, Blizzard added these consumable items to the game as a way to get them even after the cards have long since disappeared. 2009, the 5th anniversary of WoW's release. At this point, we really start to see the microtransactions speed up, so we better get through these quick. Our first ever virtual BlizzCon. Now finally people can get BlizzCon goodies without traveling across the world for a few days and paying insane costs. And for buying this ticket, you got Grunty, a Murloc in a StarCraft Marine armor. We also got the new character services, faction change, a race change. We also got another 3 TCG expansions, the Blood of the Gladiators containing the Sandbox Tiger toy, another consumable toy, Epic Purple Shirt, and a Foam Sword Rack toy. The Fields of Honor expansion containing the Path of Sonaris, an item like the Trail of Illidan but flowers instead of Fell Flame, the Ogre Pinata toy, and the Magic Rooster mount. And the Scourge Wear expansion, the Tuskar Kite pet, the Spectral Tiger Cub pet, and the Little White Stallion mount for Alliance, or Little Ivory Raptor for Horde. But wait, it's not actually a mount. It was a mount, but each time you mounted onto it, it would consume one of its charges and only came with 50 charges. Maybe the only consume on use mount in history. Or I guess there's also the Winter's Veil reindeers, those also count. But before we move on to 2010, there is one more thing they added. The virtual store. This is a store we still have to this day, although originally not in-game, it was on their website, later moved to in-game. The store launched with the little phylactery, summoning a little KT pet, and the Pandaren monk pet. However, the Pandaren monk pet launched with a new charity event where people would buy the pet and 100% of the money earned would go to the charity of Blizzard's choice, allowing players to donate to charities and be rewarded for it with a pet in their favorite game. Then, in the year of 2010, Cataclysm is released in this year, and with it, the little Deathwing pet coming from its collector's edition, as well as the Murloc Deathwing hybrid pet, Deathy, coming from BlizzCon. We also got a ton of new things added to the Warcraft store. A little Ragnaros pet, a little XT pet, and a Moonkin hatchling pet, bringing back the charity event pet. Also the infamous Celestial Steed mount. This mount caused all kinds of backlash when it was released, as it was the first real store mount, and just straight up had advantages over in-game mounts. Its speed changed along with your training, which no other pets did at the time. It would gain the ability to fly when you unlocked flying, and it could be obtained on all of your alts instead of just one character. So it was the first mount a lot of player alts would have since it was free for them, and was seen everywhere in low-level battlegrounds because of it. And then again, another 3 TCG expansions. The Wrathgate, containing the Instant Statue Pedestal toy, the Blazing Hippogriff mount, and Landro's Gift Box. This box was very common, although it's now very expensive, because it was WoW's very first loot crate, I guess you could call it. It always contained a Sandbox Tiger, or Pet Biscuit, or Path of Sonaris, although it can also contain a Spectral Tiger, a Swift Spectral Tiger, an X51 Nether Rocket Extreme, and a special blue version simply called the X51 Nether Rocket, as well as a Big Battle Bear, or a Riding Turtle. Some would almost call this WoW's version of gambling, although buying the TCG packs themselves could also be called such, so funny enough, through the art on this card, it included a ton of past loot card references on it, although most of the things visible in the card art are not actually obtainable from the box. Next, we have the Ice Crown TCG expansion containing the first ever unique Hearthstone, a toy called the Ethereal Portal. Then the Woolly White Rhino mount, and a consumable Paint Bombs, again 50 charges per card. Then lastly, the Worldbreaker expansion, which had a Grim Campfire toy, the modeled Drake mount, and Landros Little XT, the exact same pet that was available on the in-game store for 8 months at this point, but with a different name? Why they did this, I'm not super sure. 2011 was quite a unique year for WoW microtransactions. First, we got the Merkablow, a hybrid Diablo Murloc pet from BlizzCon, guild services in the manner of faction transfers, realm transfers, and name change, allowing people to change entire guilds, especially with the new guild progression system, meaning guilds actually meant something now with achievements and levels and such. Then as usual, 3 TCG expansions. War of the Elements, containing the War Party Hitching Post, a toy you place that let players click on it to mount on a horse. Then the Savage Raptor mount, and the Landros Lichling pet. Again, just like Little XT, this pet was the same one available on the in-game store, but was now also made obtainable randomly from a card pack. with also like technically a different name. Then we have the Twilight of the Dragons, Nightsaber Cub Companion, Fool's Gold Toy, allowing people to click on it to summon a Kobold Companion for a bit, and the Amani Dragonhawk mount. Lastly, the Thrones of Tides expansion, seemingly named after the cancelled raid for Cataclysm. It contained the Purple Puffer Pet, a sack of starfish toy that lets you throw starfishes onto your friend's face, and the Swift Shore Strider mount. That's a lot of microtransactions, isn't it? We are almost halfway there. In the in-game store, we also got the Winged Guardian mount and the Cenarian Hatchling pet. This time a companion from the TCG being added to the store, instead of the other way around. And lastly, we got the Guardian Cub Companion pet. This pet was unique that this pet could be bought in the in-game store for real cash, and then be traded in-game, and even sold on the auction house, and was removed 3 years later, meaning there is a limited amount of these now in the game, and they were bought for real money and traded for gold. Acting almost as WoW's token does today, except it's a pet and not WoW time or BNet balance. It was Blizzard's first attempt to try and have a way to pay real money from the online store to convert it into gold in-game through the auction house, which wasn't as successful as they probably hoped. Now we move over to 2012, first year in a long time with no BlizzCon, so we move right away to the TCG packs, with the Crown of Heavens first, a magical ogre idol toy, Grail Moss pet, and the Corrupted Hippogriff mount. Next we have the Tomb of the Forgotten War, which had the Spurious Sarcophagus toy, the Sanskara pet, and the White Riding Camel mount. Then the War of the Ancients expansions, the Demon Hunter's Aspect toy, allowing you to play a Demon Hunter only about 4 years early, the Eye of the Legion pet, and the Feldrake mount. 2012 was also the year we got the Mists of Pandaria Collector's Edition, which not only had the pet being the lucky Quillian Cub, but also a mount to match in the Imperial Quillen. Then the in-game store, we got the Cinder Kitten pet, being the charity event pet for the year, Soul of the Aspects pet, and the Heart of the Aspects mount, one of the most annoying flying mounts to ever use in-game. And lastly, we got a very special mount. This mount was called Tyrael's Charger, based on Tyrael from Diablo 3. This mount was granted to players who signed up for the annual subscription to WoW, and as a bonus for doing so, they got this mount, as well as Diablo 3 for free, and even access to the Mists of Pandaria beta. As you would guess, this promo only lasted for 6 months, and this type of promo was pretty well received, and would see a return some years later. 2013, a very special year. BlizzCon is back, and this time with Murkalot, based on a Murloc version of the new Crusader class in Diablo 3, who was also one of the only good microtransaction pets when it came to pet battles later on. Surprisingly, all of the best pets in pet battles are usually very easy to obtain in-game, with Murkalot being the lone exception, until they nerfed it in Shadowlands. We also were saying goodbye to Mercamus the Gladiator. This Gladiator Murloc pet was made available in 2009, and was gifted to players who completed 200 duels in the special arena tournament servers. These servers were open for a limited time each year, and cost money to access them. Then in 2010 it was lowered to 50. Another bonus was the Vanquisher title, a title granted to those who were in the top 1,000 teams on the server. A title that, like the pet, transferred to the normal realms as well. And with these servers going away for the final time in 2013, they were gone. Another thing going away in 2013 was the TCG, with one final expansion, Betrayal of the Guardian, the Gusting Remor pet, the Dark Portal Hearthstone, and the Ghastly Charger mount. And there we go, that's the end of the TCG. Thank Lord, because 9 new items every year from the TCG alone was way too much to list for this video. Now, onto the in-game store. Seemingly to make up for the lack of 2 TCG expansions, they put more things onto the store itself. First, the Alteric Brandy Bernard Companion, which was part of a charity event for the year, the Enchanted Fey Dragon mount, the Blossoming Ancient pet, which is a special Trent that changes appearances with the real-life seasons, the Armored Bloodwing mount, Swift Windsteed mount, and our first ever transmog of the in-game store, the Crown of Eternal Winter, Hood of Hungering Darkness, and the Jewel of the Fire Lord, which were so poorly received they didn't try putting transmog on the store again for another 7 years. 2014, WoW's 10th anniversary and the release of Warlords of Draenor. This year introduced the character boost, allowing people to instantly get to level 90, which at the time of release was max level. Although once Warlords of Draenor released, was only now high enough level to get started in the expansion. It also came with the Dread Raven mount and matching pet, BlizzCon that year, to match the expansion, came out with the Grom Hellscream Murloc. And well, the store only got a few items. The Argy Pet, which was part of that yearly charity event, the Grinning Reaver mount, Iron Sky Reaver mount, and the Warforged Nightmare mount, which came with the Hitching Post toy. Much like the Hitching Post earlier from the TCG, it allowed friends to click on it in order to get a temporary version of the mount. For how much people complained about the store mounts in this year, since they believe those WoD aesthetic mounts should have been rewards from WoD content, it was actually quite a light year in terms of microtransactions. Now into 2015. First, we have the Murkadin, a Demon Hunter Murloc given by BlizzCon, as well as Nimbles, the Fellstalker pet, and the Illidari Fellstalker mount from the Legion Collector's Edition. Then, Brightpaw, the magical cat pet, which was part of the charity event for the year, and the Mystic Runesaber mount. And lastly, the biggest thing ever added to WoW's microtransactions, the WoW token. This item was able to be bought with real money and put onto the auction house, which then could be bought for gold by other players, who could then consume it to gain 30 days of game time. Yes, WoW was finally adding a 100% direct version of trading real money for gold, and the player base has been very vocally upset about it ever since, even if it is a very popular addition to the game that is very widely used. Now into 2016, we have two Murloc pets, each based on the factions, a Horde Murloc and an Alliance Murloc, both from BlizzCon, and Mischief, a Fel-corrupted pet that was the charity event pet of the year. And that's it. Yeah, that's all there is for 2016, probably the lightest year ever in terms of microtransactions. For 2017, we got another year of faction-themed rewards, this time 2 mounts, an airship for Alliance and Zeppelin for Horde, celebrating faction more at BlizzCon. We got 3 things added to the in-game store, the charity event pet of the year, Shadow the Fox pet, the Luminous Starseeker mount, and a cat pet called Twilight. There was 2 special things that also happened this year. First, the WoW token could now be exchanged for BattleNet balance instead of WoW time. Costing $20 to purchase it, it could be exchanged for $15 or 1 month of game time. And lastly, the Asian servers had a special event to celebrate the Chinese New Year. For the Year of the Rooster, anyone who did a special subscription promo got the Magical Rooster mount. Meaning technically, in Asian servers, the Riding Turtle was no longer the only TCG mount now obtainable through other means, although the Riding Turtle was still the only one obtainable for free in-game. Also, the Tyrael's Charger mount was made available on Asian servers in their in-game store, since they did not get the same promo the rest of the world did. So on to 2018. For this year's BlizzCon, giving you a special transmog cape based on your faction, for a Horde or Alliance, as well as a banner toy, again based on your faction. To pair with this faction conflict, we got Battle for Azeroth Collector's Edition. This came with a mount also based on your faction, a Zandalai Raptor for Horde, and a Kulturon Steed for Alliance, and a Tottle, the Tortolling pet. We also got the Captain Cracker parrot pet on the in-game store, and this year's charity event was Whomper the Yeti. There was also the Vulpine Familiar and Shunzen, a dog mount calibrating the Year of the Dog. This mount was simply purchased on the store. However, in the Asian servers, like the Rooster the year before, it was earned for free through a special subscription package. Lastly, like the Magical Rooster and Shenzhou for Asia, the rest of the world was about to get a free mount the same way they got the Tyrael's Charger. By buying a 6-month sub, they could get the Dreadwake mount for free. Or they could buy it from the store itself if they did not want to pay for a 6-month subscription. Now on to 2019, and WoW's 15th year anniversary. This brought 3 new mounts with it. The Alabaster Griffin and Wyvern, based on your faction. These mounts were available from the in-game store, and as part of the physical collector's edition celebrating 15 years. And for the 4th and final year in a row, BlizzCon gave another faction-based reward. This time a pet Murloc based on Anduin and Sylvanas, alongside a special transmog set, a pair of Yeti pajamas. They also released another mount for the Chinese New Year, Hogress, yet again a 6-month promo for China, but for the rest of the world, a simple store mount. Another special thing they did this year was add 2 toys to the in-game shop. These 2 toys were released on the store with the promise of their profits going to the prize pool for tournaments, although this had a lot of its own issues in the community, which they rightly called them out for. The toys being the Transmorpher and the Faction Fireworks. Lastly, we had the Dottie pet, added to the store, which was this year's charity event pet. And another 6-month subscription reward mount added, the Silverian Dreamer. Now on to 2020, the year of, well, Shadowlands. The most recent expansion and a new, much larger collector's edition, containing multiple versions with more rewards than the last. It had a special weapon enchant called Wrathchill, armor set called Vestments of the Eternal Traveler, the Everworm Mount, Eternal Traveler Hearthstone, and Anima Wormling Pet. On top of that, something to mention is that Mista Pandaria was the first expansion to have a digital collector's edition. However, after some time it was removed from the online store. But every expansion since has stayed on the online store. And so with 2020, they returned the Pandaren Pet and Mount to the store. Next, we have 2 more mounts, both of them yet again 6-month sub promos. The Steam Scale Incinerator, and finally, the Chinese New Year mounts, which would also be made a 6-month sub promo for the whole world, making the next 6-month sub mount Squeakers, a rat for that year of the rat. But before we move on, there was one more 6-month promo that year, in the Spirit Darter costume. This transmog set is the first full set put on the store, and like the Steam Scale and Squeakers, it was given free to people who had a 6-month sub going on, or available on the store for everyone else. And just like with the transmog hood 7 years prior, was met with a lot of backlash. Well, technically, all 6-month promos and store mounts are met with backlash, but the transmog items got way more, as it's seen as a lesser item than mounts to most players. Funny enough, there is almost zero backlash for transmog items that come with BlizzCon rewards. And now, 2021. We already have 2 mounts, the Lucky Yoon Ox from the Year of the Ox 6-month promo, and the Snowstorm Bear from the BlizzCon Virtual Goodie Bundle, as 2020's BlizzCon was postponed and made entirely free and virtual, with the usual goodies being added as a bonus bundle. This bundle also giving the Moonwell pet, an alternate color version of the TBC Collector's Edition pet. Lastly, at BlizzCon 2021, 2020, whatever it's meant to be, they announced 2 new charity pets, this time changing it up a bit to make it much more player-friendly. Players can donate any amount they want, as little or as much as they want, and by doing so, they add to a donation pool, which when it reaches a specific amount, gives all players the Bananas Monkey pet, which is originally from the TCG, to all players, even those who did not donate, as well as a new pet called Daisy the Sloth if the donations reach a stretch goal. Then giving all players donated or not 2 new pets, basically for free, but also basically still a microtransaction. Now, before we end, there is something else to mention. Blizzard has many games, and they love to have their games cross over. And for all these collector's editions of WoW games, they also gave rewards for the other games, like StarCraft 2, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, Hearthstone, and Diablo 3. However, those games also cross over into WoW. So quickly, StarCraft 2 Collector's Edition, you got the Mini Thor pet. StarCraft 2 Heart of the Swarm got you the Baneling pet. StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void got you the Zeradar Archon pet. Diablo 3 got you the Fetish Shaman pet. Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls got you the Treasure Goblin pet. And Overwatch's Collector's Edition got you the Baby Winston pet in WoW. And now we are done. That is all the microtransactions in all of WoW that we could find. Something to note is that if you go off the actual list, the amount of microtransactions has drastically gone down over the past few years. Although many people did not know about many of the things, as 2006 to 2013 was filled with stuff. And as of recent years, we're returning to a more manageable amounts, especially with these mounts that are given for free to people who either already have a 6-month sub or purchase one during their promotion. Well, as free as an incentive to pay for a long sub is anyway. Toy items usually have very long cooldowns, so you can't have too much fun with them. And some are much longer than others. So in this video, we'll basically go over some of the toys with crazy long cooldowns, which includes a lot of ties. To start off with list number 10, we have a toy called the Perfect Blossom. This toy has a cooldown of 24 hours, making it only usable once per day. Just a spoiler alert, most of the toys in this list are all tied to 24 hours. Now, when the toy is used, it creates 3 Fel Petal items in the player's inventory. When Fel Petals are used on most companion pets, they will turn that pet into a ghostly hue of green and taint them with Fel energy. Added in Warlords of Draenor, specifically patch 6.2, this toy can be obtained in the jungles of the Tanaan. However, this toy is a tad complicated to get because of the process one must go through in order to obtain it. It's not a hard process, but it is somewhat trivial and annoying. To start, you must go to the middle of the Zora Marsh in an area near the southern coast of the Tanaan jungle. Under a big tree there'll be a flower in the middle of a pond with a toxic purple fume surrounding it. Standing in this purple fog will give the player the Pollen Cloud debuff, which slows the player's movement and gives a heavy dot. In order to click off the flower and get the toy, the player must pick up and eat the mysterious fruits found on the ground in the area. Eating this item will grant the player the pollen protection buff, which counteracts the pollen cloud debuff. Finally, players can then walk into the purple fog to claim the perfect blossom toy. There's one main reason why this toy lands so far down this list at number 10, and that's the fact that the Fell Petal's effects last until cancelled or the pet is dismissed. Players' companion pets may be auto-dismissed when the player joins instances, change phases, or use their Hearthstone, as a few examples. Thus, the Fell Petals that the Perfect Blossom creates cannot be counted as permanent enchantments, since the effect they can add can easily be removed by accident. While the toy does create 3 Fell Petals at a time, that is not enough to detract from the fact that there's a 24-hour cooldown for an effect that can easily be removed unintentionally. And at number 9, we have a toy named the Jeweled Offering. This toy was added in the Dragonflight expansion and can only be made by jewel crafters. This toy isn't the most exciting item, but it does have a cooldown of 24 hours. Since it's so boring, we've placed it pretty high on this list. The toy's in-game description reads, "Humbly offer your most prized possession to whomever you consider worthy enough to accept it." Activating this toy will place a fancy chest with its lid open on the ground in front of the player. When a player clicks on this chest, they receive an item called the prized jewel in their inventory. This item is a poor quality and a unique conjured item with a tooltip description that says, "Precious as it may be, this fragile gem crumbles at the slightest touch. Whomever offered this to you must truly value your companionship." When the prize jewel effect is clicked, the player performs a special animation and is given the enamored buff. This visual is a red jewel that has a little rainbow coming out from behind it. To craft the Jeweled Offering, jewel crafters will first need to learn the design for the item by reaching 30 skill points in the Enterprising specialization. To actually craft the toy, it requires all of the items listed on screen. Up next in this list at number 8 is the Jar of the Sun-Warmed Sand. This toy was added in the Battle for Azeroth expansion and is sold by the vendor named Otella within the Caverns of Time. However, Otella is only available during the WoW's anniversary event, which is a once-a-year event in November. Additionally, the toy itself cost 1,000 Time Warp badges, which is a pretty hefty price for such a small toy. When the Jar of Sun-Warmed Sand is used, it allows the player to perceive the world as if it was midday for 2 hours. In this regard, the toy is kind of like the antithesis of the inky black potion from Legion and the Shadescale toy, which turned the player's vision to that of midnight. In addition to its large price tag and limited availability throughout the year, the toy has a cooldown of 1 day or 24 hours. To make matters worse, Otella also sells an object that's just called the Sun-Warmed Sand that has the same effect but only costs 10 Time Warp badges and has a cooldown of 10 seconds. So while the Jar of Sun-Warmed Sand is tied with the cooldown of the Perfect Blossom, the jar's usefulness is much more hindered by the fact that it has a competing item that is cheaper and does the exact same effect but with a much smaller cooldown. Why this toy has a cooldown of 24 hours is baffling, especially considering its counterpart, the Shadescale toy, has a cooldown of only 1 hour. And at number 7, we have the BFF Necklace. This toy's name comes from the acronym for Best Friends Forever, and drops from a rare in the Zone of the Townlong Steppes from the Mist of Pandaria expansion. The rare that drops the toy is named Hugalon the Heartwatcher, and he's located in the Temple of Neozao Catacombs. Like the other toys in this list so far, the BFF Necklace also has a cooldown of 1 real day, or 24 hours. What's interesting about this rare is that it actually has a Titanic Watcher model, this same model that can be seen in the Vault of Archivon raid within the Wintergrass Battleground at Northrend. In fact, this callback to this short raid from Wrath of the Lich King is actually a reference to the Captain Planet catchphrase. In the Vault of Archivon raid, there are 4 bosses, with each of these Titan Watchers having an elemental theme. These include Archivon the Stone Watcher, who represents Earth, Coralon the Flame Watcher represents Fire, Emilon the Storm Watcher represents Wind, and Toravon the Ice Watcher represents Water. But to summon Captain Planet, a 5th element was needed, which was Heart. As stated in the iconic catchphrase, Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, Heart, Go Planet. By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet. Luckily, Hugalon provided the heart power, or at least he did until a player ruthlessly kills him for that toy that has a 100% drop rate. In fact, Hugalon even tells you he loves you as he dies. The BFF Necklace's only description is that it says, offer the necklace. When used, BFF Necklace gives the target player a BFF buff that reads Friends Forever. It lasts for 1 day of playtime, not real time. And this buff even persists through death, making it one of the few toys in the game that actually gives an effect that lasts even after a player has died. And at number 6, we have the first toy that dates all the way back from vanilla. The Snowmaster 9000 is a toy made with classic engineering and is learned from a schematic that can only be found in gift packages from the Feast of Wintervale. Specifically, the schematic can be found in the Smoky Wood Pastures gift packages from the quests and dailies, or from the Taking Present, which can be found under the Wintervale tree starting December 25th. This toy has a 24-hour cooldown, but its cooldown is reduced during the Feast of Wintervale. Only engineers with a profession of 190 or more in classic engineering can use this item, which turns 1 water into 1 snowball. Not only is this horribly inefficient, but since vanilla, there are now many more ways to easily obtain snowballs. To create the Snowmaster 9000, engineers need all of these items listed on screen. The notable part here is that to even make one Snowmaster 9000 requires 4 snowballs, and that the toy itself only creates 1 snowball per use. All this definitely sounds like Goblin engineering at its finest. The Snowmaster 9000 lands at number 6 on this list because it can only be used by engineers, and its schematic can only be obtained during a holiday. These 2 additional requirements place it ahead of the Perfect Blossom and the Jar of the Sunworm Sand toys in terms of how niche and unhelpful the item is. The Snowmaster 9000's only redeeming quality is that its cooldown is slightly reduced during the Feast of Winterveil. While it is more of a novelty toy, there is something cute about this profession-made toy, so it lands at number 6 on this list. And at number 5, we have Quill of Correspondence. This toy was added in the Shadowlands expansion and once again has a 24-hour cooldown. The Quill's tooltip reads, sends a letter to one of your best friends from the Ember Court. Within a day, they'll write back to you in the mail. There are 16 guests, or pairs of guests in total, with 4 of each in the 4 main zones in the Shadowlands. Additionally, each guest can respond with 1 of 3 different letters. This means in total, a player can receive up to 48 different letters when using the toy. We obviously can't go over every letter in detail, but most contain short, interesting anecdotes and incidents. Among those guests that players can write to include Lady Vash, Alexandris Morgraine, and Lady Moonberry, to name a few. Some of the highlighted letters include Plague Devise Amarylith wondering where his shipment of oozes are, Stonehead eating one of your letters, and Clay flying above Pelago so he can't write a letter. To obtain this toy, the player must first be a member of the Venthyr Covenant, and then reach best friends with at least one of the members of the Ember Court. After that, a player can buy the toy item from Lady Alikna for 500 gold. This toy is one of the most unique in the game since it sends so many messages in unique ways through the player's mailbox system. There are a lot of undertones and references in all of these different messages, so this fun toy lands at number 5 on this list. And at number 4, we have the Moonfeather statue. This fun toy item was added in Legion. It can be bought from Sylvia, the Dreamweaver's emissary in Lorelith and Valshara for 500 gold after the players reach revered standing with the Dreamweaver's faction. Like every other toy on this list so far, the Moonfeather statue has a cooldown of 1 day. The Moonfeather statue description reads, place the Moonfeather statue on the ground. What's the worst that could happen? What happens next isn't pretty. As long as the player remains near the statue, strange changes begin to occur. Every 2 minutes, a new buff will be added to the player as a transformation begins to unfold. During the first stage, the player will receive a buff called Moonkin Feather. A Moonkin Feather will appear on top of the player's head, and their head will start to feel itchy. During stage 2, the transformation advances to the next stage and the next buff called Moonkin Molting. This buff causes your character to molt feathers periodically. The next stage, stage 3, provides a buff called Feeling Moonkin. This buff turns into a moonkin that looks like the fallen moon feather with a reddish glow. The fourth and final is called Alver Come With Fever. This buff causes your moonkin character to burst into dance. After another 2 minutes, the buff fades and the player is back to their normal self. While toys that temporarily turn players into other creatures isn't anything new, the fact that this is a slow transformation toy adds another level of fun, so it lands at the number 4 spot on this list. And at number 3, we have the Element Infused Rocket Helmet. This is the third and final toy crafted from Profession on this list. Additionally, it is the second toy from Engineering, as well as the second toy from the Dragonflight expansion. Like all the other toys so far in this list, the Element Infused Rocket Helmet has a cooldown of 24 hours. The toy's in-game tooltip says, guaranteed to propel yourself to a safe height above your surroundings. Now, you're probably thinking this toy is similar to some other toys that have been in the game from past expansions, like Aviana's Feather from Warlords of Draenor, or Borget's Fiery Brimstone from Shadowlands. Using these toys will launch the player high into the air and can be useful for getting around, as long as you don't fall to your death. However, the Element Infused Rocket Helmet is a big difference in the fact that it's a little bit over-tuned. And when I say a little, I mean a lot. Using the Element Infused Rocket Helmet hurtles their players so far in the air they can surpass orbit, traversing the twisting nether, and eventually start to fall in Outland. As such, it almost acts as a teleport, and this toy is actually a pretty nifty way to get to Outland from where you may be. To craft the Element Infused Rocket Helmet, engineers will need to acquire the schematic by earning 15 skill points in the Mechanical Mind specialization underneath the Novelty subspec. The recipe also is pretty intensive since it calls for all of these materials listed on screen. Even though this toy has a cooldown of 24 hours and you have to be an engineer to use it, its teleportation effect can be very helpful, so it ranks pretty high on this list at number 3. And at number 2, we have a very interesting toy called the Coin of Many Faces. This toy, which also has a cooldown of 1 day, was added in the Warlords of Draenor expansion and can only be obtained while the Hollow's End seasonal event is active. When Hollow's End arrives, ghostly skeletal Bone Fleet pirates appear in the southern coast of Shadowmoon Valley in alternate Draenor, and it's from there that the Coin of Many Faces has a small chance to drop. Using the toy will turn the player into a random garrison follower for 60 minutes. This includes followers from the opposite faction, and since there are hundreds of followers and some recognizable names amongst the ranks, there are just so many fun outcomes when using this toy. Additionally, unlike many other transformation toys, the player keeps their transformation buff through death, which can be handy in Battlegrounds. The Coin of Many Faces is also one of the few toys in the game that isn't soulbound, so it can be traded on the auction house. There is only one downside to the Coin of Many Faces though. and that's the fact that players cannot turn into followers who are not a playable race, like the Sabaron. This is probably because those models don't have all the necessary required animations that regular player models have. The coin of many faces is also a reference to A Song of Ice and Fire fantasy novels and its TV adaptation, Game of Thrones. In the media, faceless men are followers of the many-faced god who have the ability to change their appearance at will, as well as using coins to pay their debts. And finally, at number 1, we have the Ogre Brewing Kit toy. This toy drops from an ogre mob named Stomper Krigo in Gorgron, and this toy has the longest cooldown in the game, with an entire week cooldown. It's unknown why this toy has such a long cooldown, since the toy itself doesn't really do anything remarkable. Not only is the cooldown a week long, but all it does is give the player an alcoholic beverage from Warlords of Draenor. It also costs several reagents, making it one of the few toys that needs items in the player's inventory to function. Just to be able to use the Ogre Brewing Kit, the player needs 5 Gorgon mineral water, 1 high malt hops, 1 mild spice, and 1 barley. In total, there are 15 different alcoholic beverages that can be fermented. However, many of these beverages can be bought from vendors anyway, further reducing whatever usefulness this toy had. As if all of that wasn't bad enough, in WoD it wasn't even a toy, so it took up 1 bag slot anyway. It wasn't until Legion that it became a proper toy. While we're further laying into this toy, it can sometimes give the player the Ogre Mead, which can only be used while Brewfest is active. This toy might be one of the worst, if not the worst toy in the entire game, which is quite the feat, considering there are hundreds and hundreds of toys. Just to reiterate, this toy requires several mats, has a week-long cooldown, and usually just rewards the player with a beverage they could have bought from a vendor for 5 silver. Before we go, there is one toy that deserves an honorable mention. This toy is called Elun's Lantern and is the last toy in the game that we've not covered already that has a cooldown of 1 day. This toy's reward from the Elun's Blessing, which can only be completed during the Lunar Festival seasonal event. It also requires 1 solid stone that turns into an Elun stone. When used, the toy just shines a light on the player's head for 3 minutes. In this video, we'll be looking at teleportation abilities available to players through gear and toys. We won't be discussing player abilities like mage teleports or items from professions, like wormhole generators from engineering, since these teleportation abilities will be covered in a separate video. And the wormhole generators would fill this list entirely if we included them. As really, wormhole generators are the only thing keeping engineering alive. Also, we will only be covering teleports still available in one way or another, so no Atiesh portal to Karazhan, even though it's rather good. And at number 10, we have a tie between Jaina's Locket and the Signet of the Kirin Tor. Jaina's Locket is a reward from the last part of the Shadowborn questline. This questline starts in ICC by talking to High Lord Darren Morgraine. When used, the Locket creates a portal to Dalaran and Northrend, and any member in a group with the player who uses the Locket can use the portal. The Locket has a 1-hour cooldown, and the backstory surrounding the Locket is rather sad. The Locket text reads, "Once it held her image. He always wore it close to his heart." Jaina has a sad and touching moment after you return it to her at the end of the questline, and in reward, she gives you the signet. The quest to turn it in and get the Locket is from the Shadowborn quest chain, which is exclusive to warriors, paladins, and death knights. However, the Locket is bind on use, meaning it can be sold on the auction house. The Signet of the Kirin Tor can be bought from Harold Winston in the Northrend Dalaran for 600 to 800 to 8500 gold, depending on how many times you upgrade it. This ring can be worn and has stats just like any other rings in the game. However, just like Jaina's Locket, it can also teleport the player to Dalaran. There's also a similar item named the Ring of the Kirin Tor, but it's essentially the same thing as a Signet with a few stat differences. Both Jaina's Locket and the Signet of the Kirin Tor are at number 10 on this list because, although useful, there is always an easy, accessible portal to Northrend, Dalaran from both portal rooms at Orgrimmar and Stormwind, making the teleports to Dalaran from these items somewhat redundant. And at number 9, we have Dire Brew's Remote. This is an item obtained from the seasonal event Brewfest, in which players can queue for an event dungeon and defeat Count Dire Brew. Upon his death, there is a roughly 5% chance for him to drop this item. Using Dire Brew's Remote will summon a Dark Iron Mole Machine for 1 minute. And clicking on this mole machine will teleport the player to the Grim Guzzler, the bar in the Shadowforge City in the dungeon Blackrock Depths. Anyone else in a party with the player can also use the mole machine. Another great thing about this toy is that it allows you to watch the band Elite Tauren Chieftain play in a bar anytime you like. Just talk to the Goblin on the right and you can /cheer the members of the band as they rehearse for a 5-minute plus 10% all stats buff. Unfortunately, this is not a toy for some reason, and thus the only character who received the item can use it. Blizzard should seriously consider making this a toy so that it can be account-wide. Luckily, however, the item has no cooldown and infinite uses. This item seems to have greatly influenced a Dark Iron Dwarf's racial, in which a Dark Iron Mole machine appears and the player can travel to several locations at their choosing, as long as they go and unlock them. Dire Brew's Remote is a great way to quickly get to the massive dungeon Blackrock Depths for whatever reason, be it farming transmog, mats, rep, or something else. It is a niche teleportation ability with few uses. However, Dire Brew's Remote does bring you about halfway through Blackrock Depths, And you can clear your way to the entrance to Molten Core as well, if you wanted to farm Molten Core but didn't want to fly all the way to Blackrock Mountain. And at number 8, we have the Boots of the Bay. These boots were added in Wrath of the Lich King and are a reward from the Stranglethorn Fishing Extravaganza. The boots give a +10 to fishing skill, and when used, the boots teleport the player to the inn in Booty Bay. The flavor text for this teleport reads, "Whisk you away to the finest drinking establishment in Booty Bay." They essentially act as if you had set your Hearthstone to the Booty Bay Inn. The boots have a very long cooldown of 24 hours. Additionally, when first equipped, there is a 30-second window before they can be used. While it is a unique and novel teleport, getting to Booty Bay isn't that difficult in of itself. Alliance players can simply fly from Stormwind, which isn't too terribly far away. Horde players can always fly to Gadgetzan and take the ship that sails between there and Booty Bay. Additionally, Horde players can take the Zeppelin to Stranglethorn Vale from the Zeppelin towers above Orgrimmar or outside of Undercity. These boots are very useful when trying to farm stuff within Stranglethorn like Zul'Gurub, or if they're trying to win the Stranglethorn fishing contest because they teleport the player to the NPC named Wriggle Bassbait that the player needs to hand the 40 fish in they caught in order to win the contest. Thus, to reduce time and edge out other players in the fishing contest, one should equip the boots before the contest begins so they don't have to worry about the 30-second cooldown that is incurred when the boots are first equipped. And at number 7, we have a tie with the Blessed Medallion of Karabor and the Fractured Necrolite Skull. Both of these items teleport the player to the front entrance of Black Temple in Shadowmoon Valley in Outland. The Blessed Medallion of Karabor has a 50-minute cooldown and is awarded from the quest The Fall of the Betrayer. This is the last quest in a questline which sees the player help Akama and Maiev to sneak into Black Temple. This is a very long and tedious questline, which requires you to do a lot of the Burning Crusade raids. The Fractured Necrolite Skull is a toy item which can be bought from Kupri, the TBC time-walking vendor in Shattrath, for 750 Time Warp badges. This toy has a 1-hour cooldown, but is one of the most unique in the game. The text reads, "Consume the soul of the target critter to summon a portal to the Black Temple. Upon the critter's death, a small demonic portal will appear. The player can then click on this portal to be teleported to the front of the Black Temple, and if you are in a location that has no critters, or simply wish to not have to look around, you can use the critter hand cannon toy, which spawns a ton of critters to use. And you can obtain this item for procuring the prototype questline in High Mountain. These items are very useful for getting to the Black Temple, as well as farming for Netherwings, and the skull is especially useful when farming for Illidan's Warglaives of Azeroth. There are portals to Shattrath City in both Orgrimmar and Stormwind, and the Black Temple isn't technically too far away from Shattrath, but there are two pretty large zones between Shattrath and the Black Temple, that being Terakar Forest and the Shadowmoon Valley. These items are a great quality of life improvement as they can save several minutes of flying back and forth between Shattrath and the Black Temple. And at number 6, we have a handful of trinkets and toys named either a Frostwolf insignia or a Stormpike insignia. These insignias are faction specific and can only be used by what faction the player is part of. That is, a Frostwolf insignia can only be used by members of the Horde, and a Stormpike insignia can only be used by members of the Alliance. There is a toy of each insignia and 6 upgradable trinkets for each faction as well. All 14 of these toys and trinkets provide a similar teleport with a shared cooldown of 2 minutes, and these items can only be used while the player is within the Alterac Valley battleground. Upon using any of these trinkets or toys, they will teleport the player to the respective base in Alterac Valley. The Frostwolf and Stormpike insignia toys can be obtained during the 15th anniversary Alterac Valley battleground for free. Both of the NPCs that hand out these toys can be found at the end of the cave in which players spawn at the beginning of the battle. However, these NPCs despawn shortly after the game starts, meaning you need to get them quickly. Luckily, obtaining one insignia will also automatically give you the other faction's toys insignia. The other trinkets can be obtained through questline that progress as you gain reputations within the battleground's respective factions. While not useful for traveling the world, these teleports to faction bases in Alterac Valley are invaluable during the AV battleground itself. The easiest way to win in AV is to kill the enemy commander. For Alliance, players want to kill Drekthar, who leads the Frostwolf clan, and Horde players want to kill Vandar Stormpike. Another major objective of the battleground is to cap the enemy's bunker until they burn and destroy the enemy's resources, with each side having 4 bunkers in total. Using the teleport in the battleground allows the player to return to their base to help defend their commander, no matter where they may be in the battleground. Thus, the trinket and toy is crucial in the defense of an AV game and makes for a powerful item. Especially if the battleground is coordinated enough for a faction to perform a mass defensive Zerg to retake their base from having a whole bunch of players return to the base at once to overrun the enemy faction occupying it. There are many other uses for the insignia, such as returning resources to the base to empower your fellow player and even NPCs to call in powerful units like mounted and aerial patrols, or even an elemental lord. But at minimum, this teleport is so useful that it's not implausible to say it can help a coordinated team win in Alterac Valley better, both in retail and in classic. And at number 5, we have the Time Loss Artifact, a unique trinket for Mists of Pandaria. This trinket teleports the player to the Timeless Isle and has a cooldown of only 1 minute. It can be bought for 7,500 Timeless coins, which are very easy to come by in the Isle if you accidentally ever delete or sell the Trinket. You can always just buy another one. There are portals to the Jade Forest in both Orgrimmar and Stormwind, but to get there from the Timeless Isle is a pretty long flight path. The flight path is considerably longer for Horde players since their portal's at the top of the zone, rather than the bottom of the zone where the Alliance portal is. The Timeless Isle offers many unique items and rewards, but one of the goals of every collector is to earn the achievement Going to Need a Bigger Bag, which is awarded after a player finds, collects, and loots all the rare items in the Timeless Isle. In total, there are some 50 plus items needed to get this achievement, and you can imagine that farming this achievement requires a lot of time, and that time loss artifact Trinket is a very useful thing for people who are farming here. Besides collecting on the Timeless Isle, the Trinket is also useful for other reasons. The first is that the Mists of Pandaria time-walking vendor is located on the Timeless Isle during the mob time-walking, and the Trinket saves you the trouble of having to fly here. The second is that there's a cave to the south of the Timeless Isle that offers a teleport to Gorgrond and alternate Draenor, if you need a quick way to get to the north side of Gorgrond, say for a weekly clear of Blackrock Foundry or something. And at number 4, we have the ever-shifting Mirror Toy. This item was added in Warlords of Draenor but became a toy in Legion. It can also be obtained from the TPC Time-Walking vendor in Chatrath for 500 Time Warp badges. This toy teleports the player between Outland and alternate Draenor and has a cooldown of only 15 seconds. Again, it's super useful for traveling between the Burning Crusade and Warlords of Draenor's expansions. To make this toy even better, it can be even used while being mounted. In total, there are 17 points that the mirror can take the player to, called Convergence Points, where usually there's 3 or 2 portals per zone. Using the item will spawn a little purple bubble that will lead you to the nearest portal. Upon clicking on the portal, you'll be sent to the respective portal in the alternate version of the world, Draenor to Outland or Outland to Draenor. Some examples of where these portals are located include the Dark Portal, Karabor in alternate Draenor and the Black Temple in Outland, Gruul's Lair in Outland and Blackrock Foundry in alternate Draenor, and etc, etc. Unfortunately, since the Zone of Farallon did not come to fruition in Warlords of Draenor, the mirror does not work in Netherstorm. For a complete breakdown of everything that was removed from Warlords of Draenor, check out our similar video on it. Similar to Farallon, the Spires of Iraq zone does not exist in Outland, so there's no counterpart to teleport to that zone in Outland, other than the very edges of the zone. It cannot be overstated how useful this toy can be, especially for farming old content, and there are very few items that are quite as useful as this toy in all of WoW. And at number 3, we have the Ardent Crusade Tabard. This tabard was added in Wrath of the Lich King and teleports the player to the Ardent Tournament Grounds in the northeast of the zone of Icecrown. This tabard has a 30-minute cooldown and can be bought for 50 champion seals. This is a great teleport because the area is full of the Ardent Tournament dailies and close to the Trial of the Crusader dungeon and raid. Never mind the fact that it's next door to Ulduar and a great way to get close to Storm Peaks for the Time Lost Protodrake checks. The downside to this tabard is that to buy it, you need to have earned the achievement Exalted Argent Champion of the Alliance or the achievement Exalted Argent Champion of the Horde. These achievements are meta achievements for completing 6 other reputation-related achievements called Exalted Champion of the City Name Here. The Exalted Argent Champion achievement gives you the title Crusader, and each component achievement requires the player to be exalted with the Argent Crusade, and the 5 core factions of the Alliance or Horde as they were in Wrath. Additionally, players must complete 5 days worth of Argent Tournament dailies to be awarded each of the achievements, meaning it requires at the very least doing 25 days worth of dailies before grinding out the remaining champion seals. After this massive time sink, you can use this tabard and its teleportation to continue the grind champion seals for the Argent Warhorse and other items. Since Dalaran is a pretty long ways away from the Argent Tournament Grounds, about halfway across Northrend, and through almost all of the zone of Icecrown, the tabard is a great quality of life addition, and is only one of the 3 tabards in the game that can teleport players. The other 2 tabards are from Tol Barad. The Baradin's Wardens and the Hellscream's Reach tabards also teleport the player to Tol Barad, but there is already a portal from Stormwind and Orgrimmar to Tol Barad, so these tabards are far worse than the previous expansions. And at number 2, we have a tie between the Brassiest Knuckle and the Pugilist Powerful Punching Rig. These 2 rings, when equipped and activated, teleport the player to the Brawlers Guild of their respective faction. These rings have a 1-hour cooldown and essentially act as a teleport to the player's major faction capital, since Bismo's Brawl Pub is located in the Deeper Tram at Stormwind, and the Brawlgar Arena is located in the north side of Orgrimmar. The Brassiest Knuckle was added to Mists of Pandaria with the addition of the Brawlers Guild, a new arena where players can fight against various bosses and characters of the past, including new ones, to which you gain various rewards for doing so, usually requiring key mechanics like a snake who you must constantly move while avoiding having either of you step in the poison trail he leaves behind. The Brassiest Knuckle could be purchased when the player hit rank 4 in the Brawlers Guild from Paul North for Horde players, or Quickenbush for Alliance players. The Brassiest Knuckle, however, was removed with Warlords of Draenor, and both rings were eventually replaced with the Pugilist's Powerful Punching Ring in Legion. And this new special ring can be purchased from the aforementioned NPCs for 2,000 gold. These rings are pretty powerful because as long as one of them is in your inventory, all you need to do is just equip them and you can teleport to the Brawlers Guild no matter where you are. From the Brawlers Guild, it's a very short walk to either Orgrimmar or Stormwind, where there are portal rooms to bring you to wherever you may need to go next. And finally, at number 1, we have the Guild Shrouds. There are 3 Guild Shrouds in the game, and each allows for the use to teleport to the major faction capital of Orgrimmar or Stormwind. These 3 capes can all be bought from any guild vendor in any capital city as long as the player is in a guild, and the guild has completed a certain guild achievement, and the player has at least honored reputation with that guild, which can easily be obtained by simply doing some questing while in the guild. The Shroud of Cooperation has an 8-hour cooldown and can be bought for 150 gold. It can only be bought after a guild has earned the achievement, a Class Act, which requires a guild to have a max level of each of the 12 classes. The Wrap of Unity has a cooldown of 4 hours and can be bought for 300 gold. It can be bought after a guild has earned the Guild Feat of Strength achievement to level 15. The Cloak of Coordination has a cooldown of 2 hours and can be bought for 500 gold, and it requires reaching revered status with your guild and for your guild to have completed the achievement Master Crafters, which requires crafting 500 epic items. What makes these shrouds so powerful is they are essentially 3 Hearthstones set to Orgrimmar and Stormwind, and they each have their own individual cooldowns. They are usable anywhere as long as the player is not in combat. As such, they can be used to easily return to the amenities and connections of the faction hub from whatever most desolate part of Azeroth or wherever world or plane you might be on. Combining these with some of the other teleportation abilities listed in this video can make for farming old content and getting around the world a lot easier. WoW is almost 20 years old at this point, and these teleportation abilities are a blessing to most classes and races which don't have teleportation abilities on their own. Sure, there are always the 3 Hearthstones, the default Innkeeper one, the WoD Garrison one, and the Legion Dalaran one, but these take you to other random locations that require 1, sometimes 2 loading screens just to get to your major city, and can be annoying when you're just trying to get to the auction house, and are especially annoying if you're doing something small, like a handful of daily quests on one of the continents, and then going to another continent to do another handful of daily quests. In WoW, certain talents a player chooses can allow them to move faster. So in this video, we'll take a look at talents that give new movement speed abilities based solely on the percentage movement speed increase. We won't be covering talents that give extra charges to abilities, only talents that add something new to an existing ability, replace an ability, or add a new ability entirely. And at number 10, we have the Hunter talent Trailblazer. This is a passive level 30 talent that all 3 Hunter specializations can choose. This talent was added in Legion to increase the Hunter's movement speed by 30% after the player is not attacked for 3 seconds. Trailblazer has a lot of significant drawbacks for several reasons. First, a 30% speed increase is rather insignificant compared to many other talents that we'll cover later on in this list. Second, it requires a DPS class to not attack if you want it to be up at all times. Additionally, Trailblazer is arguably the worst level 30 Hunter talent. Some of the other 2 talents available at this level are Natural Mending and Camouflage. Natural Mending reduces the cooldown of a Hunter's healing ability named Exhilaration, while Camouflage both stealths and heals the player and their pet for 1 minute. This means choosing Trailblazer and its sometimes available 30% speed buff comes at the expense of losing possible healing with Natural Mending talent, as well as the ability for the Hunter to stealth, since Hunters have no other means of stealth besides the Camouflage talent. All of this means Trailblazer is at number 10 on our list because it has a significant drawback which often outweighs its usefulness. However, it does have its niche uses for crossing large areas with no mobs, like when a player is in a battleground or arena. Another special situational use for Trailblazer would be while doing dungeons and raids and moving between trash packs and bosses. And the most useful application is that it makes Hunters one of the fastest classes when running old raids that take place indoors. Despite its downsides, Trailblazer is recommended in most Marksman Hunter talent builds, and while it does depend on not attacking, a 30% speed boost some of the time is better than no speed boost at all. And at number 9, we have a 3-way tie between several priest abilities. All 3 of these abilities increase the movement speed of a priest by 40% in slightly different ways. So they are listed here all at the number 9 spot. These 3 abilities are Angelic Feather, Blaze of Fire, and Body and Soul, and we'll quickly look at each of them. Our first talent is Angelic Feather, which is level 30 priest talent and is only available in Discipline and Holy specializations. This ability lets a priest set down a feather on the ground, and the first player that walks through the feather gets a 40% speed increase for about 5 seconds. The feathers can be placed from up to 40 yards away, and there's a maximum of 3 of them at a time. The ability was first added in Mists of Pandaria, but was severely nerfed at the start of Legion, when its cooldown was increased to 20 seconds per feather, and the speed increase and duration were shortened to their current numbers. Angelic Feather extends the speed buff with each additional feather run through and does not stack. So the maximum speed and extension of Angelic Feather will always be 40% for 15 seconds if you can time it perfectly. A player can also just use Angelic Feather on themselves, and it's one of the few speed increases that are available to priests, so a lot of priest builds will include it. Our next talent is Blaze of Light, which is a level 20 Discipline Priest passive PvP talent. This ability increases the damage of a priest's Smite and Penance by 15%. Smite is a sole DPS ability, but Penance can either be used on a hostile target to damage or on an ally to heal them. Blaze of Light adds on to this to also increase or decrease that target's movement speed by 40% depending on whether they're an ally or an enemy. Since this is a PvP talent, it can unfortunately only be used in war mode or in battlegrounds and arenas, and does not stack with Angelic Feather. The last talent is Body and Soul, which is a level 30 passive priest talent for discipline and shadow specialization. This ability allows the priest's power word shield to increase the target's movement speed by 40% for 3 seconds. For a Dis Priest, it also affects Leap of Faith, which is the ability where a priest can grab another player and bring them to the priest. And at number 8, we have Burning Rush. This is a talent available to all Warlocks at level 30. Burning Rush is instantly cast and uncast, and allows the Warlock to increase their run speed by 50%. Additionally, while Burning Rush is active, the player cannot be reduced below 100% normal speed by movement impairment effects. However, meddling with demonic power comes at a cost, and when it's active, Burning Rush also damages a Warlock for 4% of their health every second. Fortunately, this ability is automatically toggled off at 4% health, meaning it could never actually kill the player. Burning Rush has been in the game since it was added in Mists of Pandaria and has not changed since then. While extremely useful for short bursts of speed, the major downside to Burning Rush ability is that it rapidly reduces health, which causes an obvious problem if the player wishes to remain alive. Although Warlocks can easily heal with Drain Life and Health Stones, if the Warlock is trying to escape something that is damaging them significantly, Burning Rush might help them escape that threat, but at the cost of even more HP, which means the chances of death might increase. The special mechanic of a trade-off between speed and health is a pretty unique ability in the game, but it's only a 50% speed increase and it does deplete your health by quite a bit, so it's only at number 8. And at number 7, we have the Priest PvP talent of Greater Fade that unlocks at level 40. This ability is only available to the Holy and Shadow specialization. This ability allows a priest to become incorporeal and removes all threat the player generates. It also increases the player's movement speed by 50% and causes most melee, ranged, and spells to not hit the player. This ability replaces the Priest Fade ability, which is an ability that just reduces threat. One great thing about Greater Fade is that it has a relatively short cooldown of 45 seconds and is instant cast, which makes it very useful for rapid retreats. Greater Fade has its best uses during PvP, allowing for a priest to quickly escape being killed by an enemy team. This is especially true for holy priests, as healers are often the first players targeted to be killed in battlegrounds and arenas. There are a few drawbacks to Greater Fade, however. Since it's a PvP ability, it can only be used in the open world with war mode, and unfortunately can't be used in dungeons or raids. Greater Fade also only lasts for 3 seconds, which isn't a very long duration. Additionally, Greater Fade does not always reset aggro if the priest has aggroed a mob, and is in a party and none of the other players have aggroed the target yet. Although while Greater Fade is fairly limited in its uses, we're listing these talents based on their speed increases, and 50% speed increase puts Greater Fade at the number 7 spot. And at number 6, we have Post Haste, which is another Hunter talent. This is a level 40 Hunter talent which is available to all 3 Hunter specializations. This ability enhances a Hunter's Disengage, which is a baseline ability that allows the Hunter to leap backwards away from any danger up to 13 yards. Post Haste also frees the Hunter from all movement impairing effects, and increases the player's movement speed by 50% for 4 seconds after the player uses Disengage. This ability was added in Cataclysm, but it wasn't until Mists of Pandaria when it became available to all 3 Hunter specializations. The ability is great for kiting mobs and rounding them up, especially when farming old content or farming for mats in the open world. It's also useful for making quick escapes in PvP and for dodging some nasty boss mechanics that can one-shot the player. Disengage has a relatively short cooldown of 20 seconds, which means Post Haste also shares that same cooldown. In theory, this means a Hunter could have a speed buff of 50% every 16 seconds, since Disengage's 20-second cooldown immediately starts upon being clicked, and the Post Haste buff lasts for 4 seconds. Added up, this means a Hunter could have a total of 12 seconds of 50% movement speed per minute. The only downside to Post Haste is that Disengage does move the player backward, which may be the opposite direction the player is trying to go to. Post Haste does tie with the other 2 spots for a 50% movement speed increase, but since its speed duration lasts 1 second longer than Greater Fades and doesn't damage you, it's at the number 6 spot on this list. And at number 5, we have Windrush Totem, which is a level 40 enhancement Shaman talent. This ability allows a Shaman to instantly place down a Windrush Totem that increases any party member's speed by 60% when they run near it. The totem remains for 15 seconds, and the speed buff it gives is 5 seconds long. The most powerful aspect of the Windrush Totem is that it can be repeatedly used to give the same speed boost every 5 seconds. The refresh effect is extremely powerful as it allows for unique benefits to groups that deal with mechanics. In theory, this means any friendly player could receive 15 seconds of a 60% movement speed increase. Windrush Totem can also be instantly cast from up to 40 yards away, so the Shaman does not have to enter melee combat in order to plant it. Windrush Totem can also be very useful in PvP situations where speed is often the name of the game in order to capture points or flags. However, there are several drawbacks to the Windrush Totem. First, it only gives the buff to the players in a relatively short range of 10 yards. Second, it has a long cooldown of 2 minutes. Third, only enhancement Shamans can use the ability, and it would make more sense if this ability was a baseline Shaman ability. Windrush Totem was added in Legion and has remained untouched since then. Overall, Windrush Totem is a very versatile ability, and its 60% movement speed buff lands at number 5 on our list. And at number 4, we have the Warrior talent Bounding Stride. This is a level 35 talent available to all 3 warrior specializations. The main benefit to Bounding Stride is that it increases run speed by 70% for 3 seconds after the warrior lands their heroic leap. This ability also reduces the cooldown of heroic leap by 15 seconds. Heroic leap is an ability that lets a warrior jump to a target location from 8 to 40 yards away. Heroic leap is a great mobility tool and can be used to climb hills and other obstacles, assuming there's a path available. When paired with the warrior's charge ability, the heroic leap ability, and the Bounding Stride talent, it helps a warrior quickly overcome short distances. Bounding Stride has helped the writer of this video many times to tag rares and Zereth Mortis in the last seconds before they die. Heroic leap can also be used to prevent or negate fall damage by using it right before the player hits the ground. Since Bounding Stride lets a warrior use heroic leap more often and increases movement speed, both of these benefits are incredibly useful in almost all aspects of gameplay, including Mythic Plus, raiding, PvP, world content, and running old raids. In fact, Heroic Leap was added in Legion, which also saw the introduction of Mythic Plus to the game, so it is likely not a coincidence that Bounding Stride is so helpful in Mythic Plus. The one drawback of Bounding Stride talent is that if the player's Heroic Leap does not land properly, they do not gain the movement speed buff. For example, if you try to Heroic Leap off a cliff and use a Goblin Glider before you hit the ground, you would not receive the movement speed increase upon touching the ground with the Goblin Glider. While the speed duration is only 3 seconds, a 70% increased speed buff is a substantial boon, which lands Bounding Stride at number 4 on our list. And at number 3, we have the Death Knight ability Wraithwalk. This talent for Death Knights can be chosen at level 40 and is available to all 3 specializations of the class. Wraithwalk is a powerful ability with 3 component parts. First, it removes all root effects of the player. Secondly, it increases Death Knight's move speed by 70% for 4 seconds. Finally, while Wraithwalk is active, the player's movement speed cannot be reduced below 170%. Wraithwalk can be used right after Path of Frost to allow a Death Knight to cross over water as well. While it is a powerful ability, Wraithwalk comes with 2 significant downsides. The first of these 2 is that taking any action while in the 4 seconds of Wraithwalk will cancel the ability. This means it is strictly a movement speed bonus, and the player cannot use any other spells or actions while they're in the Wraithwalk form. Secondly, Wraithwalk is a 4-second channel, which means it can be interrupted and is usually easily done so in PvP situations. Death Knights are one of the slowest classes in the game, and this ability certainly helps remedy that to an extent. However, a 45-second cooldown is still a pretty long one as far as the flexibility of mobility is concerned, although this is offset by how powerful the ability is. It can still be annoying waiting for its cooldown to finish. Since Wraithwalk's 70% movement speed lasts 1 second longer than Heroic Leaps, and since Wraithwalk additionally removes roots and movement impairing effects, it lands a slightly higher spot on this list than Heroic Leap at number 3. And at number 2, we have the Demon Hunter talent, Netherwalk. This is a talent unlocked at level 35, and this ability allows the Demon Hunter to become immune to damage for 5 seconds, as well as increasing their movement speed by 100%. There are several downsides to Netherwalk. First, it is only available to the Havoc Demon Hunter specialization. Secondly, it has a pretty long cooldown of 3 minutes. Finally, when a Demon Hunter is in Netherwalk form, they're unable to attack. Demon Hunters are already one of the most mobile classes in the entire game with their double jump and fell rush abilities. Netherwalk can act as a quick escape mechanism, but Demon Hunters already have another similar ability in the form of Vengeful Retreat ability. Vengeful Retreat allows a Demon Hunter to fly backwards and works similar to a Hunter's Disengage ability. That isn't to say Netherwalk is useless, but more that it can be a bit redundant to a class with so many other movement speed abilities already. While Netherwalk can be situationally useful because Demon Hunters already have so much mobility, most Demon Hunters will usually choose the other 2 talents in the level 35 row. These other talents are Soul Rending, which increases the Demon Hunter's leech, and the 2 other unique abilities are called Desperate Instincts and Feed the Demon, which decreases damage taken for the Havoc or Vengeance Demon Hunter specializations respectively. Despite its somewhat redundancy to the Demon Hunter class, Netherwalk is still an extremely fast movement speed at 100%. That can situationally be useful, and because of the fact it lands the number 2 spot on our list. And finally, at number 1, we have the Druid talent Tiger Dash. This ability is unlocked at level 25 and can be chosen by all Druid specializations. Tiger Dash replaces the baseline Druid ability Dash, which allows the Druid to shapeshift in cat form and increase their movement speed by 60% while in cat form for 10 seconds. Dash has a cooldown of 2 minutes and is learned by Druids at level 6. In comparison, Tiger Dash shifts the Druid into cat form and increases their movement speed by a whopping 200%. The effect lasts for 5 seconds, and the insane speed boost also has a cooldown of only 45 seconds, making it by far the fastest speed boost talent in the game. Interestingly, Tiger Dash's talent was added in BFA, but has so far not been nerfed. The only downside to Tiger Dash is that it's not a flat 200% speed buff for 5 seconds, but that it gradually reduces over the time period of 5 seconds because otherwise it'd be simply too OP. Tiger Dash also unfortunately cannot be used while in Prowl, while Dash can. It cannot be understated how extremely useful Tiger Dash can be, especially in PvP. Druids have a wide array of mobility abilities and shapeshifting forms, and this ensures that you will often see a Druid in cat form capping flags in battlegrounds such as Warson Gulch. In WoW, every playable race or allied race has at least 3 unique abilities specific to their own race. We won't be looking at racial abilities that help the player escape roots or stun effects or other DPS abilities, since they could appear in another video entirely on its own. So in this list, we'll just go over abilities that help you move faster in some way. And at number 10, we have the Worgen racial ability named Running Wild. This ability was added in Cataclysm and allows a Worgen to drop on all 4s and run faster. By doing this, the Worgen player can gain an increased movement speed up to 100%. Players learn Running Wild at level 10 when riding becomes available. While Running Wild may appear to be more akin to a Druid's travel form, it actually functions as a mount, which is more of a curse than a blessing. Since it is not a travel form, being able to ride a Worgen while it's in its Running Wild stance is unfortunately not possible, but it would be very cool if it was. Running Wild is so low on this list because it has several drawbacks. First, Running Wild is not an instant cast and requires a 1.5 second cast time. This is probably because 1.5 seconds is the universal required time to mount up, but it still sucks it cannot be used instantly. Like any other mount, Running Wild has an indefinite duration until it's canceled by the player or until they're dismounted. Since it is technically a mount, Running Wild can neither be used in dungeons, raids, or indoor zones, where mounts are not allowed, nor can it be used in combat. Unfortunately, Running Wild is mostly useless at max level, since most mounts will give a faster mount speed than Running Wild would. Running Wild will always have an increased mount speed of 100%. Unaffected by things like most mount speed auras, mount equipments, and Pathfinder achievement speed boosts. All the while, the expert riding skill gives a flying mount speed 310%. This means that using Running Wild with maximum riding skill means it will always be more than a third slower than any flying mount. Running Wild did have one noticeable usefulness at max level, which is that it could be used in the Maw before ground mounts were allowed, which gave Worgen players a significant advantage over other players while in the zone. And at number 9, we have a racial ability of the Night Elf called Wisp Spirit. This is a Night Elf ability that allows players to turn into a wisp upon death and increase their movement speed by 75%. This racial has been around since Vanilla, where in Vanilla it was a 50% speed increase, but this was changed to 75% in Wrath of the Lich King. Some players in the WoW community disparagingly refer to the racial ability as improved death, mocking Night Elves for having a racial ability that is only useful after dying, rather than something that is useful to prevent them from dying in the first place. The ability is situationally useful, however, and unlike many other racial abilities, benefits all classes. If a player wishes to see what a wisp form looks like, they can gain the toy Wisp Amulet from recovering Night Elf archaeology fragments. This toy allows the player to take on the appearance of a wisp for 20 seconds and has a 10-minute cooldown. Unfortunately, it does not provide the speed buff, and any damage taken will cancel the effect. The lore on the archaeology panel in-game states, wisps are nature spirits thought to be dead Night Elves. They exist in tight connection with the forest homeland and Night Elves in general, performing such beneficial activities as construction, repair, and defense of elven communities. Many wisps sacrifice themselves in order to defeat Archimonde at the end of the Third War, and again sacrificing themselves to defend Darkshore from the Horde, and again when the burning of Teldrassil killed countless Night Elves, who would have become wisps, if not for Elune trying to send them to Ardenwald to assist, ending with them in the Maw, to only be recovered and joined within the new seat of Elune. So there are fewer wisps today than there once were for countless reasons. This ability is listed at number 9 because it is only useful while dead, and a lot of the gameplay in WoW focuses on not dying. However, Wisp Spirit certainly makes corpse runs much faster and easier, and can be great for classes that have no resurrection or healing abilities, like warriors. That being said, the uses of Wisp form are still fairly niche, and only applicable to the player for a small amount of time. This is thus more of a gimmicky racial ability, but nevertheless it is still one that can be extremely handy. And at number 8, we have the Mag'har Orc racial ability named Open Skies, which increases a Mag'har Orc's mounted speed by 10%. This is a passive ability that was added in BFA with the introduction of the Mag'har Orc allied race. Open Skies is a very useful when doing open world content such as World Quest or flying to rares. Unfortunately, this ability does not stack with other speed buffs, with 2 exceptions. The only exceptions we could find are the Guild perk Mount Up and the Death Knight ability on a Pale Horse. This means with the maximum flying speed increase of 310%, Mag'har Arcs can go at least 320% speed. Additionally, Open Skies also works in battlegrounds and arenas, whereas other mounted speed buffs do not work. 10% extra speed may not seem like a lot, but it does add up quite quickly over distance and time. Imagine how much extra time even a little speed boost would save a player when they're traveling around Azeroth or other worlds to collect candy buckets during Hollow's End, or lighting fires during the Midsummer Fire Festival. Or, of course, crossing continents for world quests and dailies 10% faster. Open Skies has few active uses, but it does have a slight impact on gameplay and makes flying to other places a little bit easier, so it lands as number 8 on this list. And at number 7, we have the Void Elf racial ability named Spatial Rift. This ability functions somewhat similarly to the Venthyr's Door of Shadows, a mage's blink ability, a bleat in much slower form, or more like the Warlock's Demonic Circle, but placed in a very different form, and only lasting 5 seconds instead of 15 minutes. The player first activates Spatial Rift to send out a bolt of void energy up to 30 yards in front of them. Activating Spatial Rift again will teleport the player to where the void portal currently is, but the player must do so within 5 seconds of the initial cast. Spatial Rift was added to WoW and Legion, specifically in patch 7.3.5, alongside the launch of the Void Elf Allied race with the BFA pre-purchase. Spatial Rift has a handful of problems, with the most obvious being that a player can usually just walk faster than it, which certainly sucks a lot of the usefulness out of the ability. However, not all is lost, as it can sometimes be very handy in PvP situations, like quickly carrying a flag across Warsong Gulch while slowed. It can also be used in Mythic Plus to skip some trash packs, as long as your allies also have a way to skip by them. Aside from those 2 reasons, its uses are few since it has so many drawbacks. Pair that with the fact that it has a 3-minute cooldown, this ability is very limited in its use. If you cast it and don't activate it within 5 seconds, if you step too far away from it, if it hits a wall or a random tiny object on the ground, or if you cast it with your back to the wall, it is wasted, and you gotta wait another 3 minutes to try it again. And at number 6, we have the Night Elf ability, Elusiveness. Elusiveness is a passive Night Elf racial ability that slightly increases a rogue or druid's movement speed by 5% while using stealth or prowl. And no, for obvious reasons, this does not work with Shadow Meld, as you can't move while Shadow Melding. So it only affects rogues, stealth/vanish, and druids PAL. Elusiveness was added in Wrath, and its original iteration reduced the chance that enemies could detect Night Elves while they were Shadow Meld or stealth. In Cataclysm, Elusiveness was changed so that it reduced the chance of being detected by enemies, only applied to Shadow Meld, and enemy reduction notice was removed from affecting stealth entirely. To compensate, Elusiveness was changed so that it also increased movement speed by 5%, while a Night Elf rogue or druid was in stealth. In Legion, Elusiveness was changed so the reduction in enemies being able to notice a player no longer worked with Shadow Meld. Because Elusiveness is so niche and requires a player to be both a Night Elf and a rogue or druid, this speed boost only affects a very small number of players, and isn't very high on this list for that reason. However, it is especially great in PvP, where rogues and druids spend a lot of time in stealth, and this 5% speed boost can change the game. Or if you're a rogue doing pickpocketing runs, this is also very useful. And at number 5, we have a racial ability for the Dark Iron Dwarves called Dungeon Delver. This is a passive racial ability that allows all Dark Iron Dwarves to move 4% faster while indoors. Since it applies to anywhere indoors, Dungeon Delver can also be used to move slightly faster through many places in both Azeroth and beyond. Dungeon Delver also stacks with other speed abilities like speed potions, which is indeed very handy. For example, a Dark Iron Dwarf Shaman in Ghost Wolf form can move at 34% speed rather than just 30% with the baseline Ghost Wolf ability. The Dungeon Delver ability was added in BFA in patch 8.0, when the Dark Iron Allied race became available for Alliance players and their counterparts, the Mag'har Orc, became available to Horde players. Dungeon Delver has so far remained the same since then, with no plans to change it, although 4% does seem rather an odd choice compared to a nice 5%. The lore behind this ability is pretty simple. Dark Iron Dwarves founded and live in the city of Shadowforge, which is in the dungeon Blackrock depths. Given the long time Dark Iron Dwarves have lived far underground, it makes sense that they would have adapted to be able to easily maneuver in dark and twisted passageways. While not the most impressive of movement speed abilities, Dungeon Delver still is a movement speed buff, and can be very helpful in any dungeon or raid, as most are considered indoors. Dungeon Delver's impact is usually small, but it can still make a difference in some situations, such as Mythic Plus, although rarely for PvP, as most PvP scenarios are considered outside, so it definitely deserves a spot on this list. And at number 4, we have the Zandalari racial Embrace the Loa. There are 6 Loas that Zandalari can pray to and receive their blessings, each given a different buff, each based on the specific Loa, but for this entry we're focusing on Embrace of Gonk, which increases your movement speed by 5%. The Shrine of Gonk is located in the middle of Dazara lore besides the Paku Shrine. After the player has given an offer to Gonk, they gain the passive ability Embrace of Gonk. The Embrace of Gonk does stack with other speed movement buffs, like the previously mentioned Ghost Wolf form and some of the Druid shapeshifting forms. There are several downsides to this ability. First, Embrace of Gonk does not apply to mounted speed. Second, Zandalari players can only change their Loa and thus their Loa's Embrace only once every 5 days, which is one of the longest player ability cooldowns in the entire game. This means Embrace of Gonk comes at the price of not being able to have one of the other 5 passive abilities which the other Loas can grant the Zandalari players. By choosing the Embrace of Gonk and its 5% movement speed, players forsake Akunda's chance to heal extra while using healing spells, Bwomsamdi's occasional DPS and healing buff, Kimball's chance to cause a bleed effect, Kragwa's chance to grant health and armor, and Paku's chance to grant critical strike. Embrace of Gonk is one of the best movement speed racials in the entire game and can be quite handy for running old raids, especially when combined with another Zandalari racial, City of Gold, which increases all gold found by 2%. This racial is pretty much right out better than Dark Iron Dwarves, simply by the fact that it's 1% faster, and you can pick and choose whichever one you want. And at number 3 on this list, we have Rocket Jump, which is a Goblin racial ability. Originally introduced in Cataclysm, this ability allows the player to jump forward several yards, a reverse version of the Hunter's Disengage ability. In Cataclysm, the ability had a 2-minute cooldown, but this was changed to 90 seconds in patch 6.2. Rocket Jump works very similar to a Demon Hunter's Double Jump, as it grants the player the ability to jump twice as high as a forward direction. Rocket Jump can also be thought of as somewhat similar to a Mage's Blink ability. The ability to teleport or jump forward can situationally be useful, but certainly not all the time. According to the tooltip for the ability, the rockets activate from the Goblin's belt, giving rise to some players calling this ability butt rockets. Rocket Jump can also be used to mitigate fall damage, if the player uses it in the air right before they land, exactly like a Hunter's Disengage, Warrior's Heroic Leap, Rogue's Grappling Hook, or even a well-timed Mage Blink. Other than sharing a cooldown with another Goblin racial ability named Rocket Barrage, which is a DPS ability, there really is no downside to Rocket Jump, and it's one of the best mobility abilities in the game, let alone just racial abilities. It can be used in nearly all gameplay aspects of WoW, and is sometimes incorporated into a Goblin's player's rotation abilities, since it can also be somewhat useful. It was especially useful for the mythic version of the Kil'jaeden fight in Tomb of Sargeras, as it was seen as required because of the obscene amount of knockback abilities that were in the fight. And this Rocket Jump made the fight much easier, and because of this, it was a bit of an outrage, as all of the world first guilds were basically forced to race change and even faction change to as many goblins as possible. For all these reasons and more, Rocket Jump quite literally lands at number 3 on this list. And at number 2, we have the High Mountain Tauren racial ability Bull Rush. This ability allows the player to rush forward at 200% speed for 1 second and stuns any enemies in their path for 1.5 seconds. Bull Rush is somewhat functionally similar to a Monk's Flying Serpent Kick. 200% speed may not sound like much, but that is an incredible ground speed buff, and can easily send the player 20 to 30 yards forwards. This speed is roughly 2/3 the maximum flying speed, which is 310%. This makes Bull Rush a great racial mobility ability, which also has a pretty low cooldown of only 2 minutes. Bull Rush has remained unchanged since it was added in the Legion patch 7.3.5, along with the High Mountain Tauren allied race. There are 2 drawbacks to Bull Rush. First, Bull Rush is not stackable with most other speed effects, like for example a Druid's dash ability or a speed potion. While it would be fun to go full Sonic, at least this restriction makes some sense from a gameplay perspective. However, Bull Rush does work with most Druid shapeshifting forms and a Shaman's Ghostwolf passive speed increase. The only Druid form Bull Rush does not work with is Travel form, which already is as fast as a mount. The second drawback to Bull Rush is that there is no way to stop it or change direction once it's in motion, and does not stop at world edges. This means it can be very easy to Bull Rush over a cliff edge or die to fall damage if the player is not careful enough. And finally, at number 1, we have another Worgen racial ability named Dark Flight. This ability allows a Worgen player to increase their movement speed by 40% for 10 seconds. Added in Cataclysm, this ability started out with a 3-minute cooldown, but was changed to 2 minutes shortly after it was introduced. Upon using this ability, Worgen players gain a speed boost, one that won't even break a player's stealth or a Druid's form. This means it has a huge benefit to Worgen rogues and Druids with their passive speed boosts. Dark Flight has a separate cooldown from other speed abilities, meaning it can be used right after or before a rogue sprint or a Druid's dash to keep them moving. Unfortunately, Dark Flight does not stack with either dash or sprint for extra zoomy action, but it does make Worgen the fastest of the fast Druids and rogues you can find. Dark Flight can be quite situationally useful, and its main appeal lies in being able to sustain long bursts of speed. Dark Flight does stack with several other speed abilities, such as a Druid's Travel form or speed potions. Dark Flight is also useful when running away from players in PvP, or even giving chase to them, or it can be useful for escaping after pulling too many mobs, or to quickly run across a boss room to escape mechanics. Because Dark Flight is so versatile and can be used in combination with class abilities to extreme effect, it deserves to be our number 1 spot for the best racial mobility ability. Elevators in WoW have heavily been beamed upon by the player base since the game first launched in 2004. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at some of the more notorious ones out in the open worlds, and not the ones that are located inside of instances like raids or dungeons. And at number 10, we have a 6-way tie. While 6 may seem like a lot, it really wouldn't make much sense not to combine all the lists from the Howling Fjord. The Howling Fjord is a zone located in the southeast of Northrend and is from the expansion Wrath of the Lich King. The zone itself has one of the most unique landscapes in all of WoW, as it features steep coastal cliffs, jagged shorelines, and a tall plateau atop which most of the zone is located. Because the main part of the zone is a huge space above the surrounding coastal areas, it is no surprise there are several elevators located throughout the zone to help facilitate players going up and down to travel various locations. The first of these 6 lifts is called the Ancient Lift. This is not a true elevator but more of a ski lift, and instead of a platform it has boats. The Ancient Lift is located on the southwest portion of the Howling Fjord and leads to the Tuskar, the Isle of Spears, and the town of Kamagua. The lift is also notable because of how easy it is to misjudge when the suspended boats arrive and leave, which results in the players usually falling to their death. Perhaps it also provided the inspiration for Jaina's entrance near the Siege of Undercity. The next 4 lifts are all located along the cliff sides of the Howling Fjord near the coast and all have the Dragon's Head near the top. The Excavation Lift is on the southern coast near the Dwarven Expedition Camp, and the Stonewall Lift is located on the southeast cliffside, close to where you can murder a lot of turkeys for the achievement Friend or Foul, which requires a player to kill 15 turkeys in 15 minutes. The Vengeance Lift is located in the east close to the Forsaken Outpost of Vengeance Landing, and the West Wind Lift is close to the Ancient Lift on the western side of the zone. The final lift in the Howling Fjord is the Midwall Lift, which is located in the middle of the zone, somewhat close to the Utgard Keep, and it also features a dragon's head on top. Howling Fjord has by far the largest number of elevator bosses of any zone in WoW. While flying mitigates many of these elevator bosses' abilities, low-level and new Wrath of the Lich King Classic players, while questing, should still be on the lookout for these fierce bosses. And at number 9, we have a small unnamed elevator in Stormheim. It is located near a Forsaken Outpost in the northwest of the Legion zone. This elevator probably is a reference to all of the previously mentioned lifts in Howling Fjord, since Stormheim has many Vicroll influences. This elevator is notable for being pretty small, making it very easy to fall off of. However, aside from flying, there is an alternative way around this boss, using the Stormheim grappling hook instead. Additionally, this elevator boss can be a little buggy at times when the assets don't properly display on the player's client. And at number 8, we have the elevators from Shattrath City in the Burning Crusade. 2 of these elevators are located on the opposite sides of the city and lead to one of the 2 opposing factions. The Scryers or the Aldors. Aside from flying, the only way to sneak into the other faction is to use their elevator, which has many hostile NPCs surrounding it. While the player can switch allegiance to factions by turning in repeatable items for rep, only one faction can be chosen at a time. The walls and cliffs of Shattrath City are quite tall, and the elevators can be a bit wonky when stepping off of them at the top. Overall, these elevators aren't too bad, but they are some of the most annoying NPC centers in the game to go every way to get to if you don't have flying. And at number 7, we have the Shattrath Overlook elevator from Warlords of Draenor. While somewhat comparable to its counterpart in TBC, this elevator is much smaller and located past many mobs in a far corner of the city. An elevator in this mini-zone is a bit odd, but perhaps it was originally envisioned as part of the Shattrath City raid in Warlords of Draenor. For those of you who don't know, an entire raid tier was scrapped in Warlords of Draenor's development, and the raid would have been located in Shattrath City. In fact, there is so much scrapped content from Warlords of Draenor that we already have a whole video about it. Link in the video description below. The only thing that Shattrath City and Talador eventually was used for was just some rares and dailies. Getting to one of the rares called Arumo the Observer is only possible by using the elevator to get to him, but it also requires 5 players to summon him, which is always a headache for solo players trying to earn the achievement Heralds of the Legion. This achievement requires players to kill 7 rare elites throughout Shattrath. Several other miscellaneous achievements are in this mini-zone at Shattrath City, and it's such a shame that nothing more was ever added to this part of Talador. Several other elevators exist in Shattrath and WoD, but the Shattrath Overlook had so many higher-level hard-hitting demons guarding it when it was current content that it was very hard to access. This fact, coupled with the fact that it was the only way to reach one of the rare elites, and that WoD originally did not plan to have flying, meaning for all of WoD this would have been the only way to get up and down here, made it the spot where many players died, especially as they raced across the city drawing huge packs of mobs trying to get to the elevator, and then the mobs would pile on the players as they waited for the elevator. And at number 6, we have 3 elevators in Orgrimmar. Any low-level Horde player who has not yet bought flying will remember the annoying trip having to wait to go up any of the 3 elevators that go up to the central plateau in Orgrimmar. Many new and low-level players easily fall to their deaths from the top of these elevators, and they seem to take exceptionally long to travel between the ground and the Zeppelin central stage area. Many skeletons can be found on the Orgrimmar elevators on new player servers, sometimes to comedic effect. To make things worse, all players who wish to travel using Zeppelins but do not have flying must not only wait for Zeppelins, but also for the elevators so they can ride up to get to the Zeppelin towers and then climb the towers themselves. The new portal room for BFA is also pretty far away from the center of the city, and is also built into the walls of Orgrimmar, which doesn't seem to be the best plan for defending the city if it ever comes under siege again. If the capital cities are ever updated, for Orgrimmar I think many would like to see the portal room added to the central plateau of the cities close to the Zeppelins and have the portal room expanded. And of course add several flights of stairs going up and down the central plateau so we don't have to wait forever for the infamous elevators to take us up. The Orgrimmar elevators are slow, loud, and difficult to time properly. However, their fall damage is usually not so bad, and flying makes not having to use them pretty easy. Because they are only mildly annoying, Orgrimmar elevators only land at number 6 on our list. And at number 5, we have the twin elevators of Dazara lore. These two elevators take players from the Great Seal to the throne of the Zandalari King atop the main pyramid. These elevators are quite a headache for several different reasons. First, they are relatively small and have no siding, meaning it is very easy to fall to your death from above if you have low HP. Secondly, since they are technically located inside, you cannot land on the top of the pyramid and ride the elevator down. Instead, you must fly back down and out one level to get to the same area the elevator would take you. This elevator is frustrating in a very similar way to that of the one elevator the Warsong hold in the Boran Tundra. Third, the elevators are pretty slow, and you may find yourself tapping your foot while you wait. Fourth, the elevator layout from the top is a little weird at first, sort of zigzagging into a little enclave before you find the top part of the elevator. Below, in the giant seal, the two elevators are located at opposite ends of the room, crammed into the walls in the north and south of the room on the second level. These elevators are also right behind important NPCs, which is a little odd, and as a result the NPCs seem more like an afterthought and do not fit the space very well. While the Desire Lore elevators aren't really going to hurt many players, they certainly can be a nuisance and are, in terms of layout and function, some of the weirdest elevators in all of WoW. And at number 4, we have the numerous elevators found throughout Revendreth. These elevators are pulled and lowered by giant chains from the stone gargoyles atop the many bridges, barricades, and towers of the zone. These elevators are notorious for several reasons. First, when Shadowlands initially came out, they could be quite buggy. Secondly, these elevators traverse such great heights that accidentally falling off of one means almost certain death. Because of how big the vertical spawns they cover are, this means many elevators take a long time to wait for. These elevators in Revendreth were also a PvP hotspots and are a pain to travel on them multiple times because of the zone's levels of verticality. Even with all of these nightmares surrounding them, these elevators were still required to navigate the zone before flying was added, which made them even more unbearable. In total, there are about 7 elevators in Revendreth, and while some are certainly worse than others, they can all be a pain. The layout of Revendreth makes this even more of a problem, not only in respect to its verticality as previously mentioned, but also because the zone is so subsectioned into smaller specific zones, especially questing and world quest area. And at number 3, we have the 5 elevators of Undercity. These elevators are infamous for several reasons. To start off, they are very small. So small, in fact, that bigger players such as Tauren sometimes have trouble being able to fit inside of them. The elevators are crammed and their layout makes them even worse. There are 5 elevators in a semicircle arc at the top behind the throne of Lordaeron, and there's a confusing series of passages to enter and exit the elevators. This area is very confusing for newcomers, with Undercity's concentric rings in all 5 elevators up to leading to a singular room with a statue and several archways. 5 of these small passages lead to the Undercity elevators guarded by abominations, with these last 2 led out behind the throne room. These entrances are not marked, so even experienced players will likely take a couple of seconds to orient themselves upon stepping off of the elevator after taking it up from Undercity. There is another way into Undercity through a tunnel in the sewers, but it takes much longer and the exit is pretty far away at the base of a mountain, not even remotely close to the throne room, although this is the entrance used during the Wrath of the Lich King siege of Undercity. The elevators are often necessary to travel as well, especially since many holiday events and NPCs take place in the courtyard above Undercity. Love is in the Air, Hollow's End, and Pilgrim's Bounty all have events and NPCs that are located in this courtyard. The fastest way to currently reach them since BFA is to take the portal from Orgrimmar to Undercity and then use the confusing elevators. So much traffic on the elevators and their necessity for transport makes them even more annoying during several holidays. Finally, the elevators can be buggy, with players glitching through walls and doors, disconnects, and even being able to fly through the roof of the elevator into the elevator shaft. While the Undercity elevators aren't too heavy lifting, it's their many mechanics that make them a terrible world boss to fight. And at number 2, we have the 3 elevators of Thunder Totem. Thunder Totem is the capital of the High Mountain Tauren and was added in the Legion expansion. These 3 elevators are notorious for how many people they kill, and how easy it is to be killed by them. First, there is a long drop from the top of the Thunder Totem to the inside drum circle at the bottom of the mountain. This drop is so long it kills many players even to this day. This fact was even used to the advantage of some PvP players who would hit players to get an honorable kill and then dropkick them down this elevator. This is Sparta style. The elevators are the fastest way to get to and from the bottom part of the Thunder Totem, since it takes much longer to fly off the upper part, down the base, dismount, and walk through the tunnels to finally get to where melee is. There are also several instance versions of Thunder Totem, such as the Legion Invasion, where you can still fall to your death, much to your embarrassment. If you're really resourceful and can somehow make it to the drum center in the Thunder Totem before hitting the ground, it will negate the fall damage, since the drum circle acts as a giant trampoline. Bouncing on the drum circle enough times that other players will award the secret achievement, Drum Circle. And finally, at number 1, we have the 3 elevators from Thunderbluff. Apparently, the Horde is much more fond of elevators in general, since there are so many of them in their cities compared to the Alliance ones. Thunderbluff is situated atop 3 small plateaus in the middle of the Mulgore Plains, and has 3 different elevators to reach the city going from the ground to the city above. All 3 elevators go to the central part of the city, and are all infamous for their ability to kill unsuspecting players. Not only are these elevators relatively small, but they move fast, and one misstep can lead the player to falling to their death. Thunderbluff may be very strategic as a city due to its geography as essentially a floating island, but its 3 entrances to the city are also guarded by some of the hardest elevator bosses in the entire game. These elevators are the only way in and out of Thunderbluff, aside from teleporting and flying, meaning that before the Cataclysm and flying became a thing, 4 alliance raids into the Torn capital could easily be stopped by a single Shaman thunderstorm flinging them from the city to the floor below. Before the Cataclysm and Deathwing got a bit too edgy and caused a tsunami, there was another elevator going from the Barrens down to the bottom of the Thousand Needles. This elevator was very similar to the ones outside Thunderbluff and was called the Great Lift. While it was destroyed in Cataclysm with the Zone update, the Great Lift has such a far drop that it's probably killed the most amount of any elevator boss in the open world. It does still exist on classic servers, so if you want to go check it out and plummet to your death, it might be worth your time to see this elevator boss before it was removed. The Tauren and High Mountains cousins do like their elevators for some reason. In World of Warcraft, several bosses, by consensus from the community, are considered especially heinous. In instance content, these infamous bosses can wipe entire raids in seconds, and it takes a special type of player to survive them. These are called the elevator bosses, and this is a list of them. And at number 10, we have the elevator from the dungeon Mogushan's Palace. This elevator boss was added in the Pandaria expansion, and the entrance to the Mogushan Palace can be found in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The Mogushan Palace elevator does not have a specific name, but it's located between the second boss, a Surok named Gekken, and the final boss of the dungeon, which is a Mogu by the name of Zin the Weapon Master. The elevator takes players from the basement of Mogushan's Palace, named the Vault of the King's Pass, back to the ground level of the dungeon. While not a heavy hitter, this elevator boss is more nefarious in its timing mechanics. The elevator takes a little under 12 seconds to make a trip and only has a 3-second window before it starts to move again. This means players have roughly 3 seconds to step on the middle of the somewhat small elevator, and if they miss the window, they must wait a little over half a minute for the next 3-second window to appear. There is a somewhat convoluted workaround where you can either die or teleport out of the dungeon and teleport back in again, and then run through the first boss room to get to the room where the elevator rises up. This new doorway opens up after the second boss is defeated, but it's also patrolled by 2 packs of heavy-hitting mobs, meaning it can be hard to regroup if you choose this route to skip the elevator boss. It is not the most terrible or hardest of bosses, but it is difficult timing and can be annoying and tedious. And so the elevator boss in Mogushan's Palace takes number 10 spot on our list. And at number 9, we have the entrance elevator in the Serpentine Caverns raid. Located in Zangarmarsh, this underground raid from the Burning Crusade expansion has players facing off against Illidan's Naga forces, led by Lady Vash. To enter the raid, players must first swim deep into a lake and then through a tube into this central area of the Serpent Shrine area, which has 3 dungeons and a raid. Immediately in front of where the player emerges from the water in the tunnel is the Serpent Shrine Cavern raid, and you can even glimpse the elevator through the water and raid portal entrance. Within the raid, the elevator is one of the largest in the game. It features a Naga engraved in the presumably wooden floor of the elevator. The elevator spans a massive distance and is located immediately in front of the player when they load into the raid. This means new players, or players not paying attention, may walk right off the edge and fall to their death as soon as they load into the raid and take a couple of steps forward. The elevator and its landing also have no sides or railings, so it's very easy to fall off, even while on the elevator, despite how big it is. The raid design is unique in that the entire raid takes place far below the entrance of the raid, and the elevator must be taken down to even start the instance. This elevator is the first and largest elevator in the game, but its placement at the very beginning of the raid where players are the most alert, and the elevator's large platform size, both diminish this elevator boss's death count. And at number 8, we have the elevator from the Eternal Palace. In this raid from BFA, players face off against Azhar and the entire Naga Empire, deep beneath Nazjatar. The elevator boss in this raid is located after the first boss of the Eternal Palace, named Abyssal Commander Sivara. This elevator then leads down to the depth of the capital, the Naga, and the rest of the raid. The elevator boss is not that bad, and the main reception leading up to the elevator is linear. The elevator, however, is surrounded by circular descending stairs, making it surprisingly tempting to jump down into the floor below. But actually, instead of a floor, there can sometimes be an empty elevator shaft, resulting in players falling to their death. While the Eternal Palace has its fair share of problems as a raid, its elevator boss isn't that bad in comparison to many of the others on this list. Perhaps because the memories are most recent, and because the Eternal Palace is such a large raid, it seems players often get impatient waiting for the elevator to descend and tempt fate. The elevator is only open air on one side, so falling off the platform isn't that much of a hazard. The elevator boss in the Eternal Palace is more of a quiet killer, but it still deserves a spot on this list. And at number 7, we have the elevator boss from Icecrown Citadel. The last major raid in Wrath of the Lich King expansions, this raid sees players finally confronting Arthas the Lich King atop his fortress of ice and death. There are actually 3 elevators in this raid, but only one is really considered an elevator boss. The most famous elevator of the instance is located after Venthyr Dreamwalker, the Green Dragon, on the way to Sindragosa. Players descend from the Frozen Spire to a Nerubian and Spider Gauntlet before facing off against the reanimated Undead Blue Dragon. The 2 other, lesser remembered elevators are the one immediately following Lady Deathwhisper, the second boss of the instance, and the elevator on the right side of the room on the ramp after Sindragosa has been defeated, which brings players back up to the Frostwing Halls. Falling down any of these elevator shafts will instantly kill the player. The elevators in ICC have no rails, meaning players can easily fall off while they're ascending or descending. The elevator shaft on the way to Sindragosa is the longest, and the small hole at the end of the hallway looks relatively harmless, but there's a long drop to an untimely death once you fall through it. The ICC elevator boss is mainly deadly just to its sudden unexpectedness, especially after a very uninteresting fight with Venthyr. Although the Green Dragon is more of a healing boss that was kind of experimental at the time, so we do have to kind of cut it some slack. And at number 6, we have the elevator from the Throne of Tides dungeon. This elevator boss was added in Cataclysm, and it has players helping Neptulon defeat Old God forces in the Water Elemental Plane in the Abyssal Maw. The elevator boss in the Throne of Tides dungeon is unique in several ways. First, it is not a true elevator, but rather a large ethereal jellyfish that slowly ascends and descends up and down an empty tube of air surrounded by water. It must be taken to get to the first boss, the Naga leader, Lady Nazjar. The elevator takes a very long time and is often buggy, with players being able to phase through the jellyfish. Additionally, the jellyfish platform is so large, sometimes the player on the opposite side of the landing does not have enough time to cross the platform when it stops to reach the landing on the opposite side before it begins to move again. This is because the lower landing is located on one side of the jellyfish platform, and the upper landing is located directly across the previous entrance. As a result, sometimes players will have to wait on one player who missed the elevator to continue on with the dungeon. This elevator boss is not necessarily deadly, but it just has a very long cooldown between mechanics, making it more of an annoyance than a deadly elevator boss. However, it definitely does spawn this list for being one of the more unique elevator bosses in the game. And at number 5, we have the elevator boss from Antorus, the Burning Throne. This raid was added in Legion and has players fighting the Burning Legion on the planet Argus, and then battling Argus itself after it becomes the Titan of Death. The elevator boss in this raid is located before the Antorian High Command boss. The elevator itself is pretty small but deceptive in 3 main ways. First, the elevator is small and elevates in the open air, meaning it's very easy to fall off the edge and fall into the abyss surrounding the elevator. Second, this elevator boss has a unique mechanic in the fact that it has a hitbox, which instantly kills players if they're below the elevator when it descends. Once the player has been squashed, their corpse turns into a pile of squashed meat. And it's very easy to misjudge how big the elevator is when it descends, so accidentally killing yourself is incredibly easy. Finally, because it is positioned right before the Antorian High Command, it is the perfect place for a surprise ambush, killing any unsuspecting players. This elevator boss proves there seems to be more than one troll in the Blizzard raid design team. Trolls in the game also like to swat blast players underneath the elevator to kill them. In fact, this became such a problem, Blizzard eventually had to insert a hotfix to stop it from being able to be done. The elevator boss in Antorus looks pretty small and unassuming, making this elevator boss all the more deadly. And at number 4, we have the 2 elevator bosses from the Warlords of Draenor raid, Black Foundry. This raid has players fighting the Iron Horde's industrial heat and facing off against the Warlord Blackhand. Both elevators in the instance are small wooden platforms that descend down into the cavernous depths of the mechanical factory for war machines. One elevator shaft is located to the immediate left when entering the first main room of the raid, where it leads to both the Blast Furnace and Iron Maiden bosses. The second elevator is located on the right side of the entrance room, down a ramp and unlocks after defeating Gruul and Orgorger. These elevators are both deadly, but the more infamous of these 2 is the elevator that leads to Hans and Franz, Flamebender Kagraz, and Kromog. This long elevator shaft will kill anyone who falls down it, and moves deceptively fast, meaning it can be very easy to misjudge its timing and fall to your death. The elevator also only waits for a couple of seconds before moving off again and after it stops, meaning it can be easy to miss hopping off or into the elevator. The other elevators in the raid are a little less forgiving since they do not drop quite so far and often cover a smaller vertical distance. There isn't much more to say about the main elevator boss other than it might be the longest vertical drop for an elevator shaft in the game, so be sure to watch your next step when you're running Blackrock Foundry for Blackhand's Mount. And at number 3, we have the elevator boss from the Siege of Orgrimmar. This boss is located immediately after General Nazgrim in the final raid of the Mist of Pandaria expansion. On their way to defeat the Old God-infused Garrosh, players face a wide variety of challenges, one of them being the infamous elevator boss. This elevator boss is located underground right after the encounter with Nazgrim, an orc and one of the prominent generals of the Horde army who led many campaigns. Although he does have a tragic fate, Nazgrim does reappear later in Legion and beyond as a resurrected new member of one of the 4 horsemen. The elevator boss is located following Nazgrim in a small hole that many players unwittingly walk straight into, and immediately fall to their death. This elevator starts in the rough-hewn passage and leads to the depths of Orgrimmar, where Garrosh has been carving out many rooms in secret with the help of the goblins ever since Wrath of the Lich King. Luckily, the respawn point is right in front of the elevator should it ever kill you. The underground caverns are really cool, and it's a shame we haven't seen much more of them since the raid. Imagine if the new Orgrimmar portal room was down there instead of near the gate, for example. Anyway, this elevator boss can be quite a pain in the butt when you're not paying attention, and it has claimed so many lives the first time players encountered it that it deserves to be towards the top of this list. And at number 2, we have the elevator from Blackwing Descent. This elevator boss was added deep in Blackrock Mountain in the Cataclysm expansion, and the Blackwing Descent raid sees players squaring off against Nefarian and a reanimated Onyxia. This elevator boss is located after the first 2 bosses of the raid, located directly across the entrance hall. After entering the raid from atop Blackrock Mountain, players have to walk a short distance to get to the main room of the raid, with other rooms branching out. The problem is that this main room is much lower than where the entrance is, and the elevator drop is close to the entrance, meaning all players have to do is walk a little forward from the raid entrance and fall to the death if they're not careful. The elevator is in open air with no railings, and falling from the top of the level of the raid to the bottom deals a massive amount of damage, usually instant killing most players. However, this is not the only fall damage in the raid, as players must also drop down into a central pit to fight both Nefarian and Onyxia in the final boss encounter of the raid. Even though Blackwing Descent only has 6 bosses, which is a small raid by comparative measures, it can really be described as having 7 bosses, since the elevator boss has taken so many countless lives over the years. And finally, at number 1, we have the elevator boss from the Vault of the Wardens. The Vault of the Wardens dungeon is located in Azuna and was added in the Legion expansion. In this dungeon, players restore order to the Warden's prison after the Burning Legion invaded and finally confront the Warden traitor, Cordana Felsong. The first elevator boss is located a little past the first boss. This elevator is not only fast and somewhat small, but it has a narrow entrance flanked by stairs that players approach from the opposite side. This means many unsuspecting players will jump over the edge and fall to their death. The elevators in the incidents are open air and free-floating, so falling off of them is extremely easy to do. Even worse, the run back from the first elevator is from the very beginning of the dungeon. When the elevator descends into the next floor of the dungeon, when it reascends, it leaves behind a giant pit. Falling into this pit also kills players. And since one of the boss fights takes place in the center of the room near the pit, many players have accidentally fallen into the void and died. The elevators move very fast, and players only have a couple of seconds to hop on and hop off the elevators in the dungeon, which just complicates matters even further. The second elevator in the dungeon all the way down to Cordana Felsong is not as bad, but it does share many of the same mechanics that the first elevator boss in the instance has. The second elevator boss usually has fewer deaths, probably due to more caution and its smaller, less inviting entrance. These elevators, but especially the first elevator boss in the Vault of the Wardens, rightfully earn the top place on this list of the top 10 elevator bosses. Speaking from personal experiences, since the time Legion came out to even with Legion time walking, I've seen someone die on these elevators more often than not. Alright, so that does it for this video. Before we go, here are some honorable mentions. First, while not technically elevators, several bosses in the game have mechanics that take place on platforms similar to elevator bosses or vertical layers, such as Black Hammer Blackrock Foundry, Tallock and Old Deer, and the Maiden of Vigilance on the Tomb of Sargeras. The elevator bosses in this video were not ranked solely by how much fall damage they do, but by a variety of factors, including the somewhat subjective factor of personal experience. If you have any suggestions for more videos, let us know down in the comments below. And until then, take care and watch that first step. It's a doozy. In this video, we're going over the minor glyphs that grant new abilities to players. And to create this list, we looked at roughly 200 minor glyphs that have been in the game throughout its entire history. And the minor glyphs that give players new abilities, or almost completely change player abilities, to the point where they're practically new abilities. Most of the skills in this video have been removed from the game in the Legion expansion, but not all of them. And at number 10, we have the Glyph of Rain of Frogs. This minor glyph can only be learned by the Shaman class, and when learned, it gives the player access to an ability called Rain of Frogs. This fun little ability causes frogs to fall from the sky at the target location. The Rain of Frogs spell lasts for 8 seconds, has a range of 40 yards, and has a 45-second cooldown. This minor glyph was added in the last patch of Mist of Pandaria. The technique to craft this minor glyph dropped from the Gulp Frogs in the Timeless Isle, and was one of the mini glyphs added in patch 5.4. However, the mass slaughter of glyphs in the Legion expansion removed this inscription technique and ability from the game. But this ability was retrained in a form of a toy which can only be bought and used by shamans from the Shaman class order hall. This toy and glyph therefore kept the flavor of being only usable by shamans, and is one of the few select toys in the game that requires a specific class to be able to use. The name of the toy is called the Tadpole Cloudseeker, and it uses the exact same ability originally taught by the glyph from Mop, as well as having the exact same cooldown of 45 seconds. It can be bought by 2 vendors in the game and all classes can buy it, although shamans can only use it. However, as previously mentioned, only shamans can access this shaman order hall called the Heart of Azeroth above the Maelstrom, and buy it for 50 gold from Flamesmith Langing, the Earthring Quartermaster. And any player can buy the toy from the Elementus Sharvak in Outland Grand for 50 gold as well. Unfortunately, this ability isn't too dramatic and isn't a Rain of Frog, but more of a trickle. Because the ability it grants is pretty tame compared to those that come, the Glyph of Rain of Frog splashes down at number 10 on our list. And at number 9, we have the fun RP-focused glyph called the Glyph of Contemplation. This glyph granted the ability called Contemplation, and was only available to the Paladin class. This ability gives a Paladin a moment of peace as they kneel in quiet contemplation to ponder the nature of the light. The glyph was added to the game at the launch of Mists of Pandaria, but it was then removed from the game entirely in the Legion expansion along with a lot of other glyphs, something you'll be hearing a lot in this video. Because this glyph added so much flavor and lore, especially to RPers, Blizzard took the decision to keep this ability in the form of a tome. This new item that teaches the ability is called Divine Tome Contemplation, and can only be purchased by Paladins from the Argent Crusade Quartermaster in the Paladin class order hall for 50 gold. The Contemplation ability is itself unique in that Paladins can usually perform several other actions while kneeling. Additionally, the ability lasts for 8 seconds and has an 8-second cooldown, meaning it can pretty much be spammed. While the Glyph of Contemplation is fun, unique, and a cool RP mechanism, it really is just that, so it only comes into the number 9 spot. And at number 8, we have another class RP flavored item, this time the Glyph of Confession. This glyph is only available to priests, and was added to the game in Mists of Pandaria. This glyph gives the priest ability Confession, which does about what you'd expect. Upon using the ability on a player, that player would confess. There were 40 confession lines at the beginning of MoP, with another 20 or so added in 5.4, and a few in Warlords of Draenor. Now, we obviously can't list all 60 plus of those lines, but a few of our favorites are, I really like to leap of faith my allies at opportune moments, as well as, I died to an elevator once, maybe more than once. And of course, I sometimes wonder if Tauren tastes like, you know. Not only does this show that the devs understand their game, but also some of them have a little bit of humor as well. As has been the case so far with the first 2 spots, the Glyph of Confessions was removed in Legion, but it also did return as Bible from a vendor. This new toy, called the Scarlet Confessional Book, also received some new convention updates for the Legion expansion as well. This toy can only be used by priests and can only be bought for Carvet Lawrence, who's a rare NPC that spawns in the underbelly in Legion Dalaran. Unlike the Tadpole Cloudseeker and Divine Tome from the 10th and 9th spots, respectively, the Scarlet Confessional Book is harder to come by, both because it's not always available, and not as easily accessible as the other toys, which are located near the order halls. The Confession ability and the toy both share the same cooldown of 6 seconds, but since the toy version of this glyph is harder to get, we're placing the Glyph of Confessions at number 8 on this list. And at number 7, we have a 2-way tie between 2 similar glyphs. These 2 glyphs are the Glyph of Illusions, which can only be used by mages, and Glyph of Disguise, which can only be used by rogues. Both of these glyphs were added in Mists of Pandaria and removed in Legion. Like the tome for the Paladin's Contemplation ability, the Glyph of Illusion was also replaced by a book which was used in order to learn the Illusion ability. This ability allows mages to take on the appearance of another nearby player, or a random NPC for 2 minutes with a 10-minute cooldown. The book to learn this ability, called Mystical Tome Illusion, can be bought from mages from Endora Moorhead, NPC at Northrend Dalaran for 50 gold. Since this item is still an ability learning tome, it is, therefore, much more similar to the original Glyph of Illusion, as they both teach the mage the Illusion ability. However, 2 other items in the game also do this, the toy named Ali's Sky Mirror and the Reflecting Prism, which is a jewel crafting created item. This ability is also similar to the Glyph of Disguise, the second glyph in our number 7 spot. The Glyph of Disguise allows the rogue to take on the appearance of whatever humanoid creature they pickpocket. The Glyph of Disguise actually survived the Legion mass removal of glyphs and still exists in the game today. A scribe has to be trained in MoP Inscription and have a high enough skill level to be able to make the glyph. Because of how similar they are, and because they're both more original glyphs than the toy items and the previous glyphs it turned into, we're giving the Glyph of Illusion and Glyph of Disguise the number 7 spots on this list. And at number 6, we have another 2-way tie, this time between the Glyph of Conjure Familiar and Glyph of Elemental Familiars. It's easy to see why these 2 were grouped together, since they both allow the player to conjure a friendly minion. The Glyph of Conjure Familiar can only be used by mages, and when it's used, it creates a familiar stone that can have one of 3 different types. The 3 familiars correspond to the 3 mage specs. That is, the Arcane spec is represented with the Arcane minion, Fire mages can summon a Flame minion, and Frost mages can summon a Water minion. Interestingly, the familiar does not depend on whatever spec the mage is in. So, for example, a Fire mage could summon the Glyph of Conjure Familiar and get a Water minion. Unfortunately, these minions do not act as pets or true companions and cannot perform any other actions or pet battles. Different types of minions, when placed close to one another, will fight each other, however, which is a neat little touch. The Glyph of Conjure Familiar was replaced with a toy item called the Familiar Stone, which is sold by the same NPC that sells the Mystical Tome Illusion in Northrend Dalaran. With the controversial move of mages no longer being able to summon water elementals and dragonflight, At least mages can take some solace in the fact they have a 33% chance to be able to summon a water familiar with this toy that has a 1-minute cooldown. Moving on to the glyph of elemental familiars, this glyph is very similar to the glyph of conjured familiar, but with a few exceptions. First, it can only be used by shamans. Second, the 3 minions it can summon are fire, water, and nature. These water minions also have slightly different appearances, and instead use the water sprite models from Pandaria instead of a water elemental model. The toy this item was changed to in Legion is called the Raging Elemental Stone. And unlike its mage counterpart toy we mentioned, the Shaman toy has a cooldown of 5 minutes instead of 1. Finally, the familiar stone toy actually gives the mage a conjured item to summon the minion, whereas the Shaman toy just automatically summons a minion upon using the toy. And at number 5, we have the glyph of Flapping Owl. This glyph for druids grants them the ability to use the spell Flap. This ability, which can only be used in the Moonkin form, allows the druid to slowly flap to the ground, reducing fall damage completely. This ability can be thought of as akin to a mage's slow fall ability or a demon hunter's glide ability. This is the first glyph on this list that was added to WoW in the World of Draenor expansion before it was removed in the next expansion after, which was Legion. As with many other abilities on this list, the ability was kept, but in Legion it was changed to be learned from an item in the Druid Order Hall. The Tome of Winds Flap can be purchased from not only the Dream Grove, but also in the Moonglade where it costs 50 gold. The glyph of Flapping Owl and Flap ability is a direct nod to the laser chicken meme of Boomies, since chickens are known to flap their wings to reduce fall speed. Since the glyph and its ability are not only fun, but actually very useful, and can possibly save the player a lot of hurt from a long drop, it slowly falls into our number 5 spot. And at number 4, we have another rogue glyph, this time the glyph of Detection. Added in Mists of Pandaria, the glyph of Detection surprisingly teaches an ability called Detection. Using this ability, a rogue can focus intently on trying to detect certain creatures. This allows the rogue to sometimes be able to see stealth players, NPCs, and objects, similar to a demon hunter's spectral sight skill. In Legion, the glyph was removed, and a new way to learn the ability came from the book Dirty Tricks Volume 1, Detection, which can be bought in the Rogue Order Hall or Dollar and Underbelly in Northrend. In fact, this ability is even required to get a rogue-only toy called the Survivor's Bag of Coins within the Ravenhold Manor. The detection ability lasts for 40 seconds and has no cooldown. The glyph of Detection itself is a reference to the original rogue ability Detect Traps from Vanilla. The ability was later removed and became a passive ability in patch 1.11. Many players were very upset that their swirly ball visual effect was removed, so Blizzard decided to bring it back by popular demand in different forms, eventually becoming the glyph of Detection. As you can imagine, being able to sense stealth objects, even while you yourself are stealthed, is a very big advantage to rogue combat and team combats in WoW as a whole. In fact, this was such a good thing they kind of normalized the ability to detect stealth creatures across all races eventually, and this glyph basically just lets you see some invisible creatures, like the ghosts in Undercity. Still, being a very popular effect by the rogue community for its visual effect, and actually having some fun Easter eggs gives it a higher spot on our list. And at number 3, we have the glyph of Zen Flight. This glyph can only be used by monks and enables them to fly on a green misty cloud in meditation. The glyph and ability were added in Mists of Pandaria along with the monk class to the game. The Zen Flight ability is very special for many reasons. First, it's an instant cast mount. While it does only have a riding speed of 170%, the monk can still cast several abilities without having to dismount. However, entering combat will also instantly dismiss the player. Monks can also harvest mats in the open world as well while flying on this mount. When the glyph of Zen Flight was removed in Legion, it became available from the meditation manual Zen Flight, which is sold in the monk class order hall. However, there's no need to waste your gold on this since monks also now automatically learn Zen Flight abilities since Legion anyway. Why the book remains in the game is a mystery, as it's entirely redundant and can't be used until the player has leveled up and has flying anyway, after which they've already learned the ability. This makes the Zen Flight ability unique in this list since what was once a glyph ability became a baseline ability for every player in the monk class. Still a unique class mount ability that is somewhat comparable to a paladin's divine charger with some extra bonuses is a pretty cool thing. Up next at number 2, we have a 4-way tie between a handful of glyphs that all do similar things. These 4 minor glyphs allow 4 different classes to use their abilities to walk on water, and in non-traditional ways. By traditional ways, I mean the Death Knight's Path of Frost ability, the Shaman ability Water Walking, the Elixir Water Walking, and the Mount Equipment Flotation Shoes. The first of these glyphs is the glyph of Burning Speed, which allowed a rogue to walk on water while using their sprint ability. The next glyph is glyph of the Lake Strider, which allowed a shaman to automatically gain water walking whenever they transformed into ghost wolf form. Then comes the Warlock's glyph of Nightmares, which allowed the Warlock's Fell State and Dread State to run across water. Finally, there's the glyph of Water Roll, which allowed a monk to use the roll ability over water. The final 3 glyphs were all added in Mists of Pandaria, and of all 4 of them, they were removed in Legion, and they have sadly never returned. These 4 glyphs provided a major useful ability for one of each class's core speed abilities. It allowed for navigating the world to be much easier than it otherwise would be. Since these 4 glyphs were not only cool, but also very handy for traversing the world, both in and out of combat, they deserved a pretty high spot on this list, so we're putting them at number 2. And finally, at number 1, we have the 2 most useful utility minor glyphs in the game. Both the Glyph of Spirit Roll and the Glyph of Spirit Wolf were added to the game in Mists of Pandaria and provide some time-saving abilities to dead monks and shamans. Before the changes to the death mechanic in the Dragonflight expansion, corpse runs, especially in the open world, could be a pain in Azeroth. These 2 glyphs allowed the monk's roll ability and the shaman's ghost wolf ability to be used while the player was dead. This allowed players to get back to their corpses faster and respawn quicker, and overall made the game much more enjoyable. The only other comparable ability to these 2 glyphs is the Night Elf Racial that turns a player into a wisp upon death and grants them faster movement speed while they're dead. This 25% increase in movement speed is from the Night Elf Racial that's called Wisp Spirit. But with the short cooldown on the roll ability and the instant cast no cooldown ability on Ghost Wolf, the 2 glyphs of Spirit Roll and Spirit Wolf are for all intents and purposes even better than the Night Elf Racial. It's a real shame Blizzard removed these 2 glyphs in Legion, and it's likely they won't return after the aforementioned death updates in Dragonflight. These death mechanics include less punishing respawn timers at Spirit Healers and a greater loss in durability and gear as well. Additionally, the Spirit Resurrection Sickness was greatly reduced from 10 minutes down to seconds. Perhaps all these changes are for the better, as the Shadowlands expansion proved that most players don't like to be in the afterlife for too long. But it still would be cool to be able to use a couple of speed movement abilities while dead to quickly get back to your corpse. The Dragonflight expansion adds a new reagent bag to WoW, which is a much needed improvement to the game. This is a major change to WoW's inventory system, but certainly not the first, and probably not the last. And in this video, we'll be looking over the history of the inventory in World of Warcraft with a focus on backpacks, bags, and banks. First, let's discuss the backpack. While the backpack can be thought of as a bag, unlike bags that cannot be moved, deleted, replaced, or have a particular type of item be specified to it, like how other bags can be specified to be only consumables, equipment, or trade goods. The backpack had 16 slots by default from the very beginning of WoW all the way until the end of Legion. In patch 7.3.5, Blizzard decided to give players 4 extra backpack slots if they enabled an authenticator and an estimate protection for their account. This brought the total number of backpack slots up to 20 for players who had enabled 2-step protection for their accounts. While this promotion was presumably put in place to curtail hacking of accounts, the backpack change did cause some minor controversy since it was an exclusive feature for only 2-factor accounts. A short while later, in patch 9.1.5, the backpack had its icon updated to a higher res quality. The Vulpera allied race added in patch 8.3 has a special passive racial ability named Alpaca Saddlebags, which allows Vulpera characters to have access to 8 additional slots for the basic backpack. This ability stacks with the 4 extra bag slots, meaning Vulpera have the largest backpack in the game with 28 slots, which is way more than the 20 for any other race. Although Blizzard stated in the past increasing the backpack inventory might break the game, the devs later found ways around it and realized it was not so complicated. With many bags being around 32 slots as the time of writing this video, hopefully Blizzard will also increase the size of the backpack in the future to make it have at least 32 slots. Vulpera players can still have 8 more slots and have a 40 slot backpack if game designers want to keep that specific racial trait too. Now let's move on to talking about bags in World of Warcraft. Bags have only really seen 2 major updates, one at the beginning of Cataclysm and one at the beginning of Warlords of Draenor. The first major change to bags inventory came in Cataclysm with the removal of ammunition from the game. As a consequence of this, all ammo pouches, quivers, and soul bags were removed from the game. These removals had a big impact on the immersion and feel of the Hunter and Warlock class, even though ammo pouches were not exclusive to Hunters since rogues and warriors could also use ammunition for their ranged weapons. Ammo pouches also contained bullets for guns. Quivers contain arrows, unsurprisingly. With the removal of the arrow and ammo mechanics from the game in Cataclysm, this meant the bags were no longer needed and they were converted into normal bags. Additionally, Warlocks needed soul bags, also known as shard bags, in order to perform various spells and abilities. In Cataclysm, the soul mechanic was reworked and the soul bags were no longer needed, so they were removed and changed into regular bags. The final bag removed in Cataclysm was the key ring, which might not technically be a bag, but it was essentially just a bag for holding keys. In WoW's early days, a lot of the dungeons and raids and other locations could only be entered via a specific key, usually obtained from a quest. By the end of Wrath, there were so many keys it was getting very hard to find and use a specific one. Cataclysm also removed a lot of the old keys in the old world with the zone and quest revamps, and the devs decided that keeping content locked behind keys was not needed, and subsequently decided to remove many keys from the game. With the very few keys remaining, it made sense that the key ring should also be removed. Cataclysm also saw a couple of quality of life updates to the inventory and bag system. First, a much needed search bar feature was added, which let players easily find items by name instead of having to scrutinize their inventory. The second change was that bags that players looted or bought would now be automatically equipped into a bag slot, rather than going into the player's inventory and requiring the player to manually place the bag into a bag slot. The The second set of changes to bags came in the Warlords of Draenor expansion. All of these changes were quality of life improvements that definitely benefited the game. The first of these changes was that quest items no longer appeared in the player's inventory. Quest items took up much needed bag space and could quickly become a nuisance, especially while leveling. The second of these changes was the ability to sort bags by item type and automatically sort the player's inventory. The third change was that items in the player's inventory now had a colored border around them to indicate their quality from poor gray items to legendary orange items. The final major change to bags in the inventory concerns the stack size. For most of WoW's life from Classic to Mist of Pandaria, trade skill materials only stacked up to 20 per bag slot. Warlords of Draenor changed this so that most items stacked up to 200. This theoretically meant 10 times the amount of inventory space. In the Dragonflight expansion, most mats from older expansions will now stack up to 1000. This is again a welcome relief and in theory gives the player 5 times more inventory space than they currently have. With the addition of the reagent bag in Dragonflight, this might even be enough to free up a bag that was previously entirely filled up by crafting reagents. Now we move on to the more analytical and statistical breakdown of bags and the item inventory creep problem. Each new expansion adds new items, crafting reagents, materials, equipment, etc, etc. And with a new expansion every 2 years, those items start to add up fast, and a player's bank can only hold so much. For example, in the Dragonflight Alpha, cooking materials in the Dragon Isles are item numbers in the 173,000s. While of course every item in game does not go into a player's inventory, it just goes to show how much stuff is in WoW, and it's quite mind-boggling. So to make this analysis easier, first let's start by examining the number of bag slots and the total number of bags. When a new bag is added to WoW, it usually has 2 more item slots than the previous bag. Blizzard in the past seems to have tried to add a new bag with 2 extra slots in each new patch, but this was only really the case for a few expansions. Note that the following graph does not include any 16 slot bags or bags lower than 16 slots. This is because the basic backpack was 16 slots all the way up until Shadowlands, so it makes sense to only include the bags that were larger than the backpack when talking about bag size expansions. These graphs also do not show crafting bags, ammo pouches, quivers, or soul bags. The first graph shows that many bags in WoW are clustered between 18 to 22 slots, and that there is a big increased number of bags with 30 slots, which stands at 7. Here's a somewhat similar graph breaking down bags added by expansions. The adjusted value includes removing the bags added during the expansions that aren't meaningful to the game as a whole, that were recycled, or that are too low in slot count to be competitive when they were current content. For example, only Demon Hunters can obtain 2 specific bags, so those 2 bags are removed from Legion's number of new bags added. As mentioned earlier, some bags have changed in different expansions, but to list all of those comparisons would be boring and tedious. Finally, here's a graph breaking down the source of each bag. You can see roughly 39% of all the bags with over 16 slots in the game came from tailors, and the bags that are looted account for roughly 28%. The remaining third of bags come from other means. Before we move on to the final bank selection, let's go a bit over some of the miscellaneous trivia related to various bags. The first bag we'll discuss is Onyxia's Hide Backpack. This 18-slot bag dropped from Onyxia in Classic WoW in one of the first raids in the entire game. In Wrath, when Onyxia's lair was retuned to current content level, the bag was updated in patch 3.2 and became the enlarged Onyxia Hide Backpack, which now had 22 total slots. Also in Wrath, tailors can make the 22-slot Glacial bag. At the end of the expansion, Blizzard decided to heavily nerf the production of this item, and in patch 3.3.3, a 7-day cooldown was placed on creating the Glacial bag. This was presumably done since specialization cloths were taken off the cooldown in the same patch. This week-long cooldown is one of the records in game for how long a player must wait until they can make another crafted item. Our next fact is focused on the 3 soul bags Warlocks had until 2010. In Cataclysm, these 3 soul bags were converted into regular bags with the removal of soul shards from the game. The first of these 3 soul bags was the Core Fellcloth bag, which was a 28-slot bag that was made by tailors from recipe dropped in Molten Core. At the very beginning of Cataclysm, this bag kept the same name but was changed to only be an 18-slot regular bag. The soul bag from TBC was called the Ebon Shadow bag and also had 28 soul slots. In Cataclysm, this bag was converted into a regular 20-slot bag. The final soul bag was from Wrath and was called the Abyssal bag. This bag was slightly larger than the soul bags before since it had 32 slots. The Abyssal bag was changed to a 22-slot bag when Cataclysm launched. Luckily, the first craftable bag in Cataclysm, the Embersoul bag, also had 22 slots, so Warlocks did not need to buy the new bag if they had the Abyssal bag previously equipped. Demon Hunters are the only class in the game with access to not 1, but 2 bags with over 18 slots. The first bags that Demon Hunters spawn with are called the Demon Hide Satchels with 20 slots. The second bag is the Vile Stalker Skin Pouch, which has 28 slots and is found in treasures in the Demon Hunter only starting zone. There are only 4 bags in the entire game locked behind reputations. The worst one is from Mist of Pandaria called the Royal Satchel. This bag has 28 slots and the player can only buy and learn the recipe after the Exalted with the August Celestials, which is one of the most notorious faction reps to get rep with since so much of it comes from boring repeatable dailies. The final bit of trivia for this section is an achievement. Despite being such an integral part of the game, there is only 1 achievement related to bags in the entire game. This achievement's name was My Sack is Gigantic, and is obtained when the player buys a gigantic bag for 1200 gold from Pilton Harris, who was a vendor in the World's End Tavern in Lower Shatrath. Her name is an obvious reference to Paris Hilton, and the Blizz devs liked her so much they gave her an even bigger bag to sell in Wrath, which was named the Portable Hole and cost 3000 gold. The name of the achievement was changed to My Storage is Gigantic in patch 9.1.5, which caused some controversy, as many saw it unnecessary, and just a PR show following the completely unprofessional revelations that emerged within the company. Now let's move on to the final section of this video, banks. An initial bank account is free to players and offers 28 slots to store almost any items. Afterwards, players can buy 7 more bag slots, which they can put bags in to increase their bank space. The cost of the bag slots increases with each extra bag slot purchase. The first slot starts at 10 silver, the second 1 gold, the third 10 gold, and the last 4 cost 25 gold each. That means there is a total fee of 111 gold and 10 silver to get all the slots. However, this does not include buying the bags that the player must then add to the bag slots that they just bought. When the player has bought all 7 bag slots, they will earn the achievement Safe Deposit, which is worth 10 points. Orgrimmar is the only city in the game with 4 banks. For comparison, Stormwind only has 2. Northrend Dalaran takes second place for the city with the most banks since it has 3 banks, including the Underbelly. As another interesting aside, unlike a real bank, in WoW you cannot store currency within the bank, only items. Almost currencies are not physical in-game anymore. A currency tab or stash would still be very helpful at the bank, especially for depositing gold as well, since so many players are somehow over the 1 million gold mark. The banks throughout all of WoW are run by some interesting unique NPCs, like the Montagues in Undercity and Glutonia in the Broken Isles Dalaran. There are so many to discuss that we'll make in a top 10 video with these colorful characters in the future. We touched on the reagent bank earlier in the video, but one more detail to note is that the reagent bank contains exactly 98 slots. The reagent bank must also be bought with gold, 100 gold to be precise. Thus, to buy all 7 slots in the reagent bank, the player needs to spend 211 gold and 10 silver. Since Warlords of Draenor, players have been able to craft using materials currently stored in their bank from anywhere in the world without needing to retrieve the items first. Currently in the game, there are 4 ways for players to gain access to their bank without actually being at the bank. We won't include the guild ability mobile banking, since that only allows players access to their guild's bank. Since guild banks are so different, we'll cover them separately in a different video. There is only one way for every player to be able to access their bank anywhere in the world. The first step of the first method is to become a champion of your race at the Argent tournament. This will award the player with the Argent Squire companion for Alliance players and Argent Gruntling companion for the Horde players. Next, the player must earn the Crusader title and farm 150 champion seals. Only then can the player buy an Argent Pony Brittle from Dame Evniki Capsulus, who was the Crusader's quartermaster. Using this item gives you the Argent Squire or Gruntling a cute little mount, and the player earns the achievement Pony Up. Now, when the player summons their companion, the companion offers mailbox, trade, and bank services. However, the companion will despawn in 3 minutes and will incur a 4-hour cooldown before you can call on their services again. The Guild Herald and Guild Page also share similar functions, but do not allow access to the player's bank. Another way to gain bank access is to use the Sassy Imp toy, which has a 35% drop chance from the Imp Master Valisa in Tannet Jungle. However, the Imp does not always listen to the player, and the bank services is only one of the many services he can provide. In addition to only working in Draenor, the toy has a 1-hour cooldown, so it's not the most ideal form of bank access. The final 2 ways to gain bank access in the open world are through being an engineer and using Jeeves, or being a goblin and using the racial Hobgoblin. Before we wrap up the video, let's briefly touch on Void Storage. Void Storage is similar to the bank, but with several key differences. Only trophies, cosmetic items, and special holiday items can be stored in it. Void Storage costs 10 gold each to deposit an item. Luckily, withdrawing an item from the Void Storage is free. The interface contains 160 slots and 2 tabs and costs 100 gold to open a Void Storage account. The system of long-term inventory management was first implemented in patch 4.3 and was meant to serve as an everlasting storage solution to items players wanted to hold on to as keepsakes, but that were taking up valuable inventory space. The lore behind the Void Storage is that it was invented by the Ethereals, who utilized their technomancy to create an apparatus through which the pocket dimension can be accessed.